Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I am glad that you can be with me as we go through the trails of life. Travails, I think is the word I was looking for on that one. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. It is Friday. We are heading into an inauguration coming up on Monday. I'm supposed to be in DC for that inauguration, and I plan to be there with the one, the only, the great Caleb Maupin. And speaking of Caleb Maupin, he is going to be on the show today. And we have another damn good show for you today. I'm going to start here. If you guys find yourself digging this content, you find yourself coming back here often, hit the like button. You make this content what it is, and I appreciate you for making this content what it is and helping me put on this show. We are growing. We are growing because of you, and I thank you for that growth. One of the interesting things, there's been several interesting news bits, and one of them has to be what is taking place or what took place yesterday in the State Department room with Miller, Sociopath, Matt Miller, and his other sociopath, Anthony Blinken, being completely confronted with just an epic tongue lashing by journalists in the room. And to make this even worse, Sam Hussein, who I've had the opportunity to bring on fault lines, gets manhandled and dragged out by various goons as he's sitting there doing his job, trying to get them to answer a goddamn question for once in their goddamn life. It is anybody that has watched the State Department, and I've had the opportunity or misfortune to watch the State Department continuously over the last several years, especially over the course of the genocide. And what you ended up getting over and over again was cover, shill, lie. That was the strategy. Cover, shill, lie. And sociopath Matt Miller will look dead-eyed into the audience and just cover. Well, I know that that baby was killed, but I mean, after all, we need to care about October 7th and the Israelis and that soldier who killed that baby. There will be an investigation. Okay, well, what about the kids who are freezing to death? Well, that sounds horrible, and there will be an investigation, and we're going to wait. We don't want to preempt the investigation that Israel is going to do, and we'll do an investigation. We'll watch and we'll wait. What about the journalists that are being killed? I mean, they killed multiple journalists over the course of a day. That is bad, and we believe in press freedom, and we are pushing the Israelis, and we're asking them about it. I mean, we're not for it. I mean, we're asking them about it. It was that for the entire time. Literally, what I just said, it was that the entire time. Regardless of what they did, regardless how atrocious it was, regardless, even when it was clear that they were indiscriminately killing, or for that matter, starving. If you go to the State Department and you get a Patel, a Matt Miller, or an Anthony Blinken, cover, shill, lie. That's what you got all the way through. It was maddening. It's always, we're going to let Israel investigate. We're not going to preempt Israel's investigation. Now, when you do that for an entire year, then you're effectively just covering for chaos. You're covering for atrocities. You're covering for war crimes. And that is what the State Department ended up being. They weren't working for our best interests. They were working for Israel's best interests and allowing Israel to proceed with that massacre. So you can imagine that people who care and have a conscience will feel some kind of way about never getting a straight answer when you know as a flat fact that what they're doing is just covering for genocide. They were upset. They were enraged. And I would make the point that rage, when you are in the face of somebody who is killed and has worked with another government to kill tens of thousands of babies, then yeah, rage is the correct response. Rage, indignation, that is the correct feeling. That is the thing that you get. It's a righteous indignation when you're confronting a monster. And that is effectively what those journalists exuded, righteous indignation. We saw this earlier from this woman that had the opportunity to finally tell Blinken to his face a truth that very rarely does Blinken get told. I'm going to play this clip one more time. I did this yesterday because this woman is doing God's work, and God bless her. I don't know what she does in life. I don't know where she came from. I don't know any of that stuff. I know in this moment, she is doing God's.
Since October 7th.
Brown children, oh, thousands and thousands and thousands. How do you break American law? How do you do all that and then sit here and tell these people, civilized people, that you are doing what? Kill, your policy for the Middle East. Kill, and kill, and kill. Just what the Israelis saying. You're a brutal war criminal. We sat in front of your house for a year. You have no compassion. You are a monster.
Since October 7th.
You are a brutal war criminal. You have no compassion. You are a monster. How are you sitting here telling these civilized people? How are you telling these people this stuff? You just kill, and you're just covering. You have no empathy. You are a monster. So this gets followed up by the press having their say at Blinken. If they're going to do their apology tour and they're going to go through and try to beef up their legacy by effectively lying about that legacy, then yeah, it's a good thing that every so often they get confronted and told the honest to God truth about who they are and what they do. This is Max Blumenthal having to go at Antony Blinken, again, doing God's work.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have the time to take questions
Your
at the end.
father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
Thank you.
You smirk through a genocide. Of all of these people, all of them are sociopaths. There's a special place of hatred in my heart for Matt Miller. It just is. I have watched him over and over and over again. And when he's talking about issues of death, it's like that brave Israeli soldier kill that dangerous baby. And Matt Miller would stand there and defend that nonsense. And he would do it with a smirk. Day after day after day, the entire course of this war, he would do it with a smirk. It didn't matter what you were saying to Matt Miller. Hey, Matt Miller, all of these babies were killed. There were dogs eating babies at hospitals because of the fact that Israel destroyed the hospital. And he would, yes, there will be an investigation. He would say it with a smirk. Over and over and over again. They call him Count Smirkula for a reason. And I always call him a sociopath. And so, yeah, creating a scene, yes. Righteous indignation, yes. How does a rational person with a conscience engage a monster that is paying for a genocide? That's the question that we need to really confront if we're looking at what these journalists did and why these journalists are responding the way that they did. Sam Hussein, who, again, has sat there over and over, pushing, trying to get answers out of the State Department over the fact that they're backing and legitimizing a genocide. Sam Hussein gets manhandled and dragged out of the meeting or out of the press room. This is, I'm trying to find the best clip for that. So right here. And notice Count Smirkula is also intimately involved in this one too.
We are being reborn.
It's also a moment of historic possibility.
You can leave, sir. You want to come with us right
Again, I'm
now?
happy to address
With the- with the
questions.
No, I want him to
respect.
answer
With
my
the
questions.
respect.
I look forward to answering
He's gonna
questions.
speak for an
Thank you.
hour.
Okay, we'll let him speak. We'll hear from him. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's gonna be lots of speakers.
Sir,
Thank you.
you
Happy to
would
answer
like-
some
would like to
questions.
be escorted
I look
out?
forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Instead of making another speech every day.
Sir, would you like to be escorted out?
Go away.
You don't have to, once you're tell me where to go, you want to be escorted out or not?
I want to
Thank
answer
you.
questions.
I look forward to answering questions in a minute.
I'm a
Thank
journalist.
you.
I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller has explicitly told me he will not answer my questions.
So, thank
I'm
you.
justified in
So-
what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket, the names of those who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally.
Get your hands off me.
this morning,
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking
Please, sir,
questions.
respect the
Wasn't
process.
the
We'll have an opportunity to take
wasn't the
questions in 2
IC
minutes.
wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Why aren't you in the Hague? Turn around. Turn around.
Finally,
That's a damn good question. Why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague? Yeah, you have an ICC arrest warrant for Gallant and Netanyahu, but what about the people who backed that genocide? Meaning, what about the people who sat there and shielded for it, that gave cover to it, that legitimized any killing, that Israel had a right to defend itself, even when it would defend itself against a baby that may or may not be violent and dangerous? I mean, this is what they have done. How on earth are we going after Netanyahu, but we're leaving people like Miller or Blinken, or for that matter, Joe Biden, that paid for that genocide? It couldn't happen without Joe Biden. It couldn't happen without Matt Miller. It couldn't happen without dead-eyed sociopath Anthony Blinken. It could not happen without this cast of misfit goblins that are out there effectively allowing this to take place. Israel is a minor power. If it wasn't for the U.S. continuously giving it weapons, giving it intelligence, or for that matter, giving it political cover, which is exactly the job of these modern day Goebbels like Blinken and Miller. It's just outrageous. And they dragged Sam out. Sam has been one of those journalists who have been doing God's work in a very difficult situation of the State Department, because all things being equal, as he said, answer a damn question. And that is one of the things that they try very hard to avoid, answering questions. I want to go to my guest, though. Yeah, it's just enraging, to put it mildly. Laith Marouf. Laith Marouf is an award-winning producer and broadcasting law consultant. How you doing, Laith? You doing okay today?
Good to be with you, Jamal. Thank you for the invitation.
No, man, always. I wanted to get your take on this because you've been one of the people that I've brought onto the channel. I've always appreciated your point of view, whether we agree or not. And you are, for one, in the area. You do damn good reporting on the events that are taking place on the ground. And so now that apparently Donald Trump, or the reporting seems to go with Donald Trump pushing Netanyahu into a ceasefire, or at the very least a quote-unquote truce. You know, there are so many thoughts on this. For one, it seems that the Joe Biden administration just didn't push. All the reporting at this point comes out that Joe Biden, for all of the moaning for all of the griping that was coming out the Biden administration. Behind the scenes, there was no pressure on the Israeli government at all. And then you get Trump, who comes in and says, get the deal. In which case, it seems, according to reporting, that Netanyahu was pushed into a deal. And you get all of the screaming out of Channel 4 News, or for that matter, out of the Israeli government, that they didn't necessarily want to do it. Give me your take on this. For one, how do you see the deal? All of the reporting is that this is the same deal that was on the table for the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. This is exactly the Biden proposal from 8 months ago. And, I don't personally believe all the hype and propaganda about Trump forcing Netanyahu or strong-arming him or threatening him into agreeing to this ceasefire. I think this is all part of the rebranding of the empire that the deep state that the Zionists are part of do. Trump has been selling himself as the strong man versus the liberal weakling Biden. That was kind of the branding that is coming out from the empire as a whole, even before the election. And we saw, of course, what happened with Biden in his debate with Trump, which clearly was a managed affair. Nobody would have put Biden in a debate months in advance of the election out of the blue if they didn't want him to lose on purpose as a state, or at least make it look like he lost the vote, because ultimately I don't even believe that there's a democracy in the US. So I think this is all rebranding, preparing the world stage for Trump. This morning, finally, Netanyahu's government signed on to the ceasefire agreement. And it should come into effect hours before the inauguration on the 19th. And the first steps of the quote-unquote ceasefire will come on the day of the inauguration. So it's clearly all managed to fit the branding of Trump as a new emperor.
No, I accept that. I mean, like I said before, if anything, Donald Trump's ego, I don't believe would allow him to be humiliated in the way that Joe Biden was humiliated. Because, over and over again, Netanyahu seemed to take any and every opportunity to make Joe Biden look incompetent or look weak. And for Donald Trump's own self-conception, I don't get the sense that he would allow himself to look weak in that way, in which case he told the Arab community, I'm going to get a deal, I'm going to end the war. Kamala Harris told the Arab community that nothing was going to fundamentally change. The Arab community seemed to believe him, in which case they voted for him en masse and pulled those votes away from the Democratic Party. And to Donald Trump's credit, he did say, I want to end wars, not start them. And so, he put out the Jeffrey Sachs thing, calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch. And people didn't know how to place that. And then you get the reporting that Donald Trump was pushing Netanyahu into a deal, and that the Israeli government was screaming that they didn't want to accept the deal. Because the rub is, if they accept the deal, that means Hamas won. Regardless of the devastating toll that the Palestinians took, Hamas is a resistance group. And the expressed interest of Israel was to eliminate Hamas. And Hamas is still there, nonetheless. How do you view that, by the way? Do you view it in those terms, that the expressed interest of Israel was to eliminate Hamas as a political and military entity? And Blinken, in one of his recent speeches, pointed out that Hamas has reconstituted itself. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, obviously, decolonization wars are costly for the people that are seeking liberation. There is no decolonization war that since World War II that cost less than 6 million people in sacrifice. When we count what happened in Vietnam, millions dead in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and or when we talk about the Algerian liberation struggle. So similarly, the price that the Palestinians were going to pay in order to achieve this liberation from colonialism was going to be high. And as we also should note from liberation struggles, is that you don't judge the winner and the loser by the amount of dead civilians or destruction of infrastructure and civilian housing. Much of Vietnam was destroyed before the Americans left. Similarly, majority of North Korea was destroyed before the defeat of the Americans there. So we don't judge who is the winner and the loser by how many civilians were killed. Similarly, the Germans killed close to 30 million. The Nazis basically killed close to 30 million civilians in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe.
Yep.
And that includes, of course, the millions that died in the quote-unquote Holocaust. So but in the end, Germany lost. Although it had less civilian losses, less infrastructure destruction, but it lost the war. So here is the same situation. The Israelis were attempting not only to defeat and destroy Hamas, they were attempting to defeat the will of resistance within the Palestinian people.
Mm-hmm.
And what they ultimately did is actually reinforce that will of resistance and expand that will of resistance to a global scale. So right now, if there was before the genocide in Gaza, a big chunk of European, North American population that was supportive of Israel, and or anyone in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that was confused and didn't know the story of the Palestinian people, today, the whole globe, the vast majority of humanity is anti-Zionist and cannot see a future where the Zionist colony has a right to exist. So the seeds of the destruction, the end of the Zionist project have already been planted and are flowering, actually. We're almost going to get to the fruiting stage of that. So the Zionists lost the war in Gaza. They have been unable to defeat the population and the will of the Palestinian people, and there's no going back now for this project.
That is a good point. I mean, how do you commit a massacre, a genocide, and then expect to go back to some level of normality? What's interesting, and I guess there are 2 points or 2 questions. One, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have effectively said that they were going to collapse the government if Netanyahu accepted the deal, because from their point of view, this was considered to be a loss. They wanted to annex Gaza. They wanted to annex the West Bank. They may get to annex the West Bank, by the way. We don't know what Trump gave assurances on in order to get the ceasefire, as you said, to be the big strongman. We also don't know whether or not Israel will use any provocation as a justification to resume conflict, because I don't have this belief that if Israel resumes, that the U.S. is going to, let's say, be a hard ass in regards to pressing them to stop. Up to this point, anything that they've done, the U.S. has effectively backed them on, regardless of how deceitful they were being. So they're supposed to pull out of Gaza. They're supposed to pull out of Philadelphia corridor. They're supposed to give back thousands of the hostages that Israel was holding, and get the hostages back that Hamas was holding. At some point, they're supposed to exchange the corpses of the various people. Do you believe that the Israeli government is going to collapse if and when they start to implement this deal, considering that the hardliners in the government are completely against it?
Well, Netanyahu is a cat with 9 lives. He definitely proved himself as to be the the politician in Israel that can survive the most changes. And, if Smotrich and Ben-Gvir withdraw, there's all the quote-unquote liberals in the Israeli parliament that would be glad to join with Netanyahu and get back to the situation of having a unity government, as was in the beginning of the war on Gaza, before
I see.
Labid and the others withdrew from the government, and then Netanyahu made the deal with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. So he's still the kingmaker, and his party is still the biggest party in the parliament, in the Knesset. So I think some other parties will join him in government. Now, let's presume that this is the worst, and actually Netanyahu is unable to create a new government with the other parties. Well, it's going to actually spell the end of Netanyahu, and anyone that was in his government as a cabinet ministers is going to now expose them to a higher risk of arrest under the ICC arrest warrants, because he will not have any more, prime ministerial immunity. Okay, so he's not going to be anymore an elected official of a government. And so I think he will try his best to balance his government with other parties if Ben-Gvir and Smotrich withdraw.
That's a good point. I mean, because Netanyahu has a criminal case looming already, that he knows that the moment that he gets out of government, he is fair game. And, the prosecution have been going after him on this front, even in Israel itself. So you're absolutely right. He's probably going to do any and everything in his power to stay in power. One of the other questions is, where do the Palestinians go back to? I mean, something like 70% of all the houses, the dwellings, the buildings have been fundamentally flattened. And I mean, like literally just gone. The hospitals, all of the hospitals in northern Gaza have been destroyed. Israel clearly went into this with the idea that they were going to take this territory and clear all of it out, meaning we don't want anybody coming back and living in this particular part of Gaza. It seems that that's not really going to be the case now, that they're pulling back. But the fact that they're pulling back and they're going to allow people to come back into the area, where are these people expected to go when everything has been destroyed?
Well, the Palestinian people will go back to their homes even if they're destroyed, and they will pitch a tent on top of the rubble of their homes. This is the strong will of the Palestinian people. This is not to say that the reconstruction efforts are going to be easy. In fact, I think there's more rubble right now in Gaza than any other war zone ever. So just removing the rubble is going to take years, let alone building the replacement housing and so forth. And
I mean, Laith, real quick, just to interrupt on that point. They were destroying blocks of residences at once, meaning there are videos of Israel attaching like dynamite or bombs or explosives to various houses and then just blowing them up. The guy in Brazil, if you remember, the one that they're trying to prosecute in Brazil, that Israel was trying to effectively sneak out of it because they were going to prosecute him for war crimes. What they were going to prosecute him for was effectively blowing up a block, like an entire block. I've never seen anything like it. It wasn't even like them dropping a bomb. It was them attaching explosives to a demolition thing of just blowing it all up at once. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to back up.
Yeah, and they actually sneaked him out to Argentina, where there's the Zionist freak president there who just got awarded the highest award in the Israeli state, President Milei of Argentina.
Yeah.
So look, the amount of destruction is actually higher than 90% of all structures are destroyed. So it's not even 70 somewhat percent. So there's the destruction is unimaginable, And the ceasefire agreement, the last step in it, the fifth step in it, is the beginning of the reconstruction. So we will see if that will ever happen. But you could imagine that the amount of cement that needs to come into Gaza is going to be remarkable. And traditionally, the Israelis didn't allow cement to come into Gaza because of the fear that it's going to be used in building tunnels. So how is this going to happen? Who's going to flip the bill? It's going to be billions of dollars to try to reconstruct the strip. And of course, all of this doesn't have anything to do with the West Bank. We don't know what's going to happen in the West Bank. Will the Israelis actually begin a similar campaign in the West Bank? We already saw a few days ago the Israelis fire from an F-15 on a residential block in Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank and killed 5 civilians and injured tens. So the war could break out any moment again. Now, and we already also, by the way, heard Kushner, the son-in-law of Trump, is throwing right now a couple of $1 billion on building settlements in the West Bank and investing in construction companies that build settlements in the West Bank. So that can give us a hint that maybe Trump will be declaring the West Bank as part of the Zionist colony, and what that will trigger, how the resistance in Gaza, other places will respond. So this war is not over. It's just we are entering a different stage of it.
Just to show people what we're talking about, just to give some context. Now that Joe Biden is leaving, 60 Minutes and the media can report on what this stuff looks like. I mean, that's astonishing. Like in this article, they were talking about how kids were playing with bombs, like US-made missiles and bombs, and they were using it for tents, all sorts of stuff. Like, this is the legacy that we're leaving in this area, and we paid for it. We paid for all of this. Look at this. I mean, this is outrageous.
Yeah. I mean, look, the whole U.S. And the whole empire that it controls, they have ruined their reputation. All the propaganda that was expended by the United States since World War II to convince the rest of the world that we all have to believe in the American dream or follow the ways that the American society works and so on to be prosperous, and or this idea of human rights and international law and what have you, have been burned in the Holocaust of Gaza. Yeah. So the reputation of the West as a whole and the ability of the West to even project soft power is gone. So this is why we see the whole empire now depending 100% on military might to project its power. So, and we see that playing out, of course, here. And look, I think Trump, with his statements that he's going to take Greenland, Canada, and Panama and change the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America. Those are not statements of somebody that's not ready to go to war. And also, actually, these are statements of somebody that is openly saying, we live now in an imperial age. All that era of post-World War II has been closed, and we're back to the situation at the end of the 1800s of countries occupying territory and annexing it, whether it's the Turks in Syria, the Israelis in Syria, and what have you, and he's telling the world, deal with it. If you can't stop me, You can't stop me. So this is how we are right now, where we are.
So I think it's a yes and a no. I think when Donald Trump looks at the world, meaning I agree with you and I disagree with you. From the standpoint of Syria, agreed, 1,000%. From the standpoint of Israel and Turkey, 1,000%, agreed. I think what Donald Trump is looking at is this kind of idea of spheres of influence, that from the US standpoint, we want Greenland and Canada because we need to be able to compete with Russia, China, Iran, and he sees the world organizing against the US. Now, they're organizing against the US because we have been belligerent and we have been a violent actor on the world stage. But I think he's looking at it as, for one, Greenland can't stop me, or Denmark can't stop me. Europe is already a vassal. The US needs to be bigger in order to deal with the threats of the 21st century. Like, I think that's the way he's looking at it. But I don't think from his point of view, he needs to go to war in order to get those things. But I do agree with you that the world seems to be in a different place with this. I want, what is Gaza going to look like after? Okay, let me answer this way. Assume for the moment that this deal is what this deal says it is, meaning that the reporting on it is correct. And assume for the moment that humanitarian aid and resources at some point are going to come into Gaza. Has there been any conversation about what the government is going to look like in Gaza going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the ceasefire agreement doesn't mention anything about the formation of the Palestinian governance inside Gaza. And I think this is a very important admittance by the Zionists and the empire as a whole that Hamas is a fact and it is the controlling force inside Gaza, and there's no challenge to that. There's no ability to change that. So we remember for a whole year they were telling us that the PA of Abbas, the collaborationist president of the PA, will be the ones that's going to govern and so forth. Well, that's all gone. There's no discussion about that anymore. So it will be Hamas governing with the other factions that carried arms against the Zionist colony and invasion. I think this is also going to infect what's happening in the West Bank. Okay, so if the Israelis attempt to crush the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority continues to collaborate in this process in the West Bank, I think at any moment there will be a confrontation between the Palestinian resistance and the collaborationist class with Mahmoud Abbas, and things could go out of hand very easily in the West Bank, all because of the situation in Gaza. So Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the PFLP, others that carried arm now are the only legitimate voice to represent the Palestinians because they have defended Palestine and the Palestinian people and have won resoundingly this battle against the mighty empire governed from DC.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. What happens in the West Bank? I mean, Donald Trump apparently got $100 million with an agreement that he was going to annex or allow Israel to annex the West Bank, effectively just steal the West Bank outright. What is your expectation if indeed they sign a deal in Gaza and yet they go and try to annex the West Bank? What do you think happens in that situation? Does Hamas reinvigorate itself and continues and presses another attack? Do forces in the West Bank resume and initiate a resistance? What do you think happens in the situation? Because I agree with you. It's very possible that what Donald Trump did was saying, look, Bibi, I'll give you the West Bank if you end this or give a ceasefire in Gaza, basically transactional in the way that he's thinking about it, especially since he got money to do just that. What happens if indeed that's what Israel attempts to do in this situation?
Yeah, look, if they do annex the West Bank, which I do expect, I think it will be the last bullet in the head of Zionism. And the Zionists right now have given up on all formalities and or propaganda and any of that, and are have resorted to kind of the wild beast mentality, thinking that just killing en masse is victory, right?
Yep.
And this level of arrogance and supremacy and detachment from reality, we can see it how it's playing out in Syria, the overstretch of their military occupying huge swaths of Syria. There's no air defense there. There's the collaborationist Wahhabis in Damascus, the HTS, that are letting them continue occupying land and stealing resources. But at any moment, one Syrian with a sniper rifle can ruin the whole presence of Israel in southern Syria. Similarly, this West Bank is not a small area like Gaza, and there are settlers everywhere intermingled in between Palestinian villages and Palestinian towns. If there is an actual annexation that happens, and that triggers a full-out war, Israel will find itself, kind of with its with its behind exposed. Okay,
Yeah.
and it's not going to be as easy. Well, it was never easy in Gaza, but it will be even much more complicated. And the amount of destruction that they will have to conduct across this huge swath of land to achieve even what they couldn't achieve in Gaza is going to be huge. So I think the more that Israel entrenches itself, the more it expands, the more it loots, the more it occupies, the weaker it is. And they're not like, there's a limited amount of soldiers they have. There's a limited amount of resources that the U.S. can continue to send to it. And I think one of the main factors of why the U.S. finally got the Zionists to stop the war in Gaza is because of how much it's affecting the ability of the United States to move its weapons and its assets, security and satellite and intelligence and all of that around the world in the last 16 months because of the concentration on this war in Gaza. You have to realize basically, the United States lost, I think, 12 or MQ-9s over Yemen.
Oh,
I think the whole
Yemen was shooting them down. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole fleet of the United States is something like, I think, 30 or 40 of those MQ-9s. So you lost a third of the MQ-9s in this battle. So that affects the ability of the United States to monitor other locations in the world. If every satellite, that has surveillance capabilities was moved to be stationed over Gaza for the last 16 months, what did that mean to other fronts? So imagine that you have to do it in the West Bank on a much larger scale territory. How much of the resources of the empire will have to be dedicated to this? So I think there's contradictory things that are happening within the empire. It doesn't know where its priorities, even those statements by Trump about Greenland, Canada, and Panama. This is not something easy. I mean, I can tell you something right now. Maybe there will be not one Canadian that will carry arms against the U.S. if the U.S. occupies, and I mean Canadian, white Canadian. But there's 2 million Indigenous people in Canada, and they're armed to the teeth. And the last time the Canadian military had a confrontation with the Indigenous nations of Canada was in 1995. In the Chipatan Lake standoff, or what's called in English the Gustafson Lake standoff, where 7 Indigenous warriors held to a standstill 7,000 Canadian soldiers for 6 months in the woods. And they had to fire on them 77,000 rounds of ammunition. Okay, they used planes, tanks, APCs, landmines to try to defeat them. Okay, so you can imagine if something like that breaks out in Canada. Canada is the second largest country in the world,
It's massive.
landmass wise. There's no way you can, keep hold of this country if the indigenous people actually decide
that.
to revolt. Yeah.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't think he's trying to militarily take Canada. And Trump talks a lot. Greenland, yes, I'm pretty sure he actually wants Greenland. Whether he gets it or not is secondary to the point. But I really do think, from his point of view, he's looking at, I don't think this want is an issue of strength. I think it's an issue of weakness, or at the very least, a perceived weakness that Donald Trump feels like he's confronting a different world. But no, I don't think he's trying to militarily take Greenland. I mean, he even said it himself. He wants to use economic force, quote unquote, to force Canada to be the 51st state.
The Canadian Prime Minister met with the. I'm saying all these things because I'm a Canadian citizen. Okay.
Oh,
so
okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I watch Canadian news, although it's very boring. But the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau met with the premiers of the provinces. A premier is like a governor of a state in Canada, and the most significant economically to the relation with the U.S. premier is the premier of Alberta. She didn't show up to the meeting. Alberta is where all the oil and gas of Canada is, and is exported to the United States primarily. Mm-hmm. And she refused to sign on to the joint statement of the premiers and the prime minister that condemned the threats of tariffs on Canada. And, in the statement, they're talking about counter tariffs and so forth, and having a trade war basically with the United States. So clearly, Alberta will secede and join the United States if Trump, pushes, and then Canada will not have any oil, and it will be also have a gap in the middle of it, so it's clear that he can get Canada if he wants to, if he pushes a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like if you just a little pushing, you might be able to get it. Explain something to me about the West Bank, and I guess there are two questions on this. One, I've only been to Bethlehem in the West Bank. I've only been to that area once. And are they intermingled? Like, meaning, if Israel tries to annex the West Bank, is it a similar situation as Gaza where it's a separate entity, or are the Palestinians and Israelis enmeshed together? Meaning, are they going to be able to do the bombing and the killing in the way that they did before in the West Bank because you had a separate community? Or is it a different process? Is it a different setup? I hope that question makes sense. I'm trying to get my head around and try to get it an image to the audience of what the population density is like among Palestinians and Israelis, and are they living together in that area?
Yeah, so they are not like living together as in the same village or the same town or the same city. But there'll be, let's say you went to Bethlehem, it's surrounded on the hilltops right around it are settlements. Okay, so you can do maybe air bombardment of Palestinian cities. But the Palestinians don't need to fire rockets at settlements as they were doing in Gaza. They can just cross the fence into a settlement that's just beside their community and start shooting up. Okay.
I see. It's a different animal. Yeah.
Yes. So the Israelis will need to deploy their military fully in every colony in the West Bank to defend it. Okay. So it's a much, much harder situation, and or they have to besiege every Palestinian village, town, and city, and that you need a huge amount of military deployment to do so. And if they deploy their majority of their military in the West Bank to suppress the Palestinians, well, then what's going to happen on the border with Lebanon? What's going to happen on the border with Gaza? So it's it is not a viable situation militarily for the Israelis. So I think and if they commence a genocide in the West Bank, how is the world going to respond? You see, like, I don't think anybody, even those few Christian Zionists, how will they respond when they see the Nativity Church being bombed in Bethlehem?
They would
What's going
accept.
to be the see?
They
So
would accept it.
things are different. Things are different in the West Bank than in Gaza, and I think it's a totally different beast.
Okay. Well, I wanted you to give me your take on this statement by Blinken. And I hate to play anything that Blinken is putting out, but I do want to get your take on this, because there's a question of what was this for if what Blinken's saying is true.
Void. Indeed, we assess that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost. That is a recipe for an enduring insurgency and perpetual war. The longer the war goes on, the worse the humanitarian situation gets in Gaza.
So if that's true, that for all intents and purposes, after all of this killing, that Hamas is effectively reconstituted itself. I mean, for one, is it true? And two, what does it mean if it is true after killing, like the Lancet is talking about, over 100,000 people, most of which were civilians?
Yeah, I think the number of dead is probably closer to 300,000. We'll know as the rubble is pulled out, as we start being able to count all those who died from starvation and the effects of medical negligence and not being able to reach their medicines and have operations and what have you. So I think it's much larger number. Now, I am 100% sure that not only Hamas, but all the armed Palestinian factions have recruited more than they had even in the beginning of the genocide in Gaza. And that is because, for the simple fact that anyone that was pacifist and or nonviolent in their resistance to Israel before the genocide, anyone that had criticism for Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or whatever, before the genocide in Gaza, those who then had to watch their whole life being destroyed by Israel, the indiscriminate killing of their relatives and families and friends, they have now been radicalized. And most probably the Palestinian resistance groups are receiving an overwhelming amount of applications to become militants in these groups that they can't even respond to, because they don't have enough training capabilities and or enough personal weapons to arm these individuals. Yeah. I think I've seen so many times this being posted on social media by different Palestinians saying, I hated Hamas before from Gaza, and or I was criticizing them, or I was nonviolent. If anyone gives me right now, not only a machine gun to shoot an Israeli, if somebody gives me a suicide belt, I'll put it on right now.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is the normal reaction.
Well, yeah.
I think something else that people should realize that, since the 1930s, there's been a nonstop a rebellion by the Palestinians, and at every stage, there was a huge defeat and or genocide of whatever movement that there was. So in the 1930s, for instance, there was the first general strike in Palestine. Still, the British occupation was there. The Palestinians were asking the British to leave and to stop the process of building the Zionist colony, and that was led by, Palestinian and Arab unificationist nationalists, and they were all slaughtered by the British. And that led us to by the 1960s, the rise of the PLO, and Palestinian Liberation Movement, that was, liberal, that included also the leftist communists like the PFLP, who were defeated by the 1970s, and that brought us by the 1980s, the Islamic version of liberation with Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So it doesn't matter how much the West, even if Hamas and Islamic Jihad were destroyed, which they haven't been, or defeated militarily, which they haven't, they would have been a birth of a new version of a Palestinian liberation movement that will, put on a different ideological, perspective to itself. But in the end, all the Palestinian people want liberation, and this is a path that cannot be diverted except through the total genocide of the Palestinian people, like the genocide of the indigenous people in the United States is the only thing that stopped them from continuing to resist.
One last question before I let you go. So, the reporting, and I guess it's true at this point, it's understood to be true. The Netanyahu government, or the Israeli government, was giving money to Hamas in order to create a division and separation between the PLO, or the PA, Palestinian Authority, and Hamas, basically created a division between the West Bank and Gaza itself, with the notion that if you can make Hamas the face of the opposition, you can break the coalition and the cooperation between Gaza and the West Bank, weakening both in the process of doing so. Is there any potential for a reunification of sorts, whether that's the West Bank goes in a different political direction, whether that's the PA and Hamas coming to some kind of terms to create a political coalition or political force against the Israeli government and against the occupation? Or is that off the table?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the Palestinian Authority and Fatah as a party have destroyed themselves and their reputation within the Palestinian population. There's no way they can save themselves. I think if I was Mahmoud Abbas and the goons around him, I'll be always worried about somebody assassinating me from the Palestinian people, maybe even somebody in their family. Mm-hmm. So it's this point of Israel allowing money to come into Gaza in the 1980s to help Hamas become a opponent, or to break the control that Fatah had. Yes, that happened, but because that only happened because Fatah began becoming more and more liberal, and eventually ended up with the Oslo Agreement. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad were gonna rise with or without the interference of the Israelis, because people were already looking for an alternative to the beginnings of surrender that Fatah led. So I don't think we should put too much weight on the idea that Israel was responsible for this. And one last thing here I would say is that, when all options that are rather, humanist from their roots are defeated, as happened with, let's say, the communists, the socialists, the liberals, all were defeated by the Israelis and imperialists by the collapse of the Soviet Union. The only thing that oppressed people have to fall on by that point was religion, was God.
Yeah.
Even when we read what Marx said about religion as the opium of the masses, he doesn't mean that it's a bad thing that is drugging people. He's saying it's the only thing that can bring them happiness in this misery of capitalism and imperialism. Mm-hmm. Like a impoverished person, goes and seeks drugs to find some happiness in their moment. So this is the condition of the defeat of the anti-colonization movements and the Soviet Union and progressive movements around the world by the American empire by 1990 and the late 80s, basically. led us to having people falling back to religion as their escape. And I would say one more thing. I think, look at the Palestinian people. If they didn't have right now this religious conviction that kept them going during this genocide, or the Lebanese people, right? If they didn't have this religious conviction, would they been able to resist this way? No. And so even though I am a secularist in my political leanings, I would never wish that the Palestinian people or the Lebanese people give up their religiosity, not until definitely the defeat of Zionism.
And by the way, we did it in the US too. It was just in a different religion. I mean, if you're thinking of Black revolutionary movements or struggle, if you think of Martin Luther King, again, Christian, he used it despite being a socialist, it went in the context of faith. Malcolm X, again, went in the context of faith. And so, yeah, when you have people in situations where it's hard to see a way out logically, religion becomes this kind of, you can hold on something, this kind of belief in the unseen, this belief that we're going to fix this. This is going to change. We're going to get some level of liberation. No, I totally get it. I got to get one last thing from you. I want to get your take on something. Donald Trump this was years ago, and I played this for, who was I talking to yesterday? I can't think of his name. I played it for him yesterday, and Peter Coffin, he was shocked that this video existed. This is Trump having a conversation about Abbas and Netanyahu when he apparently met them. Give me your point of view on this. This is fascinating to me.
I think it's a terrible personal trait. I haven't spoken to him since, right? I don't know. I thought he wanted to make a deal more than Netanyahu. And I will be honest, I had a great meeting with him, Abbas, right? I had a great meeting with him. And we spent a lot of time together, talked about many things. And it was almost like a father. I mean, he was so nice. Couldn't have been nicer. And after meeting with Bibi for 3 minutes, I looked at him and said, "You don't want to make a deal, do you?" And he said, "Well, and the fact is, I don't think Bibi ever wanted to make a deal. Why? I thought the Palestinians were impossible, that the Israelis would do anything to make peace and a deal. I found that not to be true."
I'm amazed by that clip, because that is like the exact opposite of what Trump is saying today. But that has to be still rattling around in his mind, regardless of what he's saying openly today. Give me your take on this, and this could be the end. We can close it on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump, what's good about him is that he's a frank person, okay? There is no handlers that can handle him even, okay? Even if they try to coach him to say some things, he just blabs out what he thinks. Yeah. And that's great. We've heard so many truth nuggets coming out of Trump that we haven't heard from US presidents for decades. Yeah. Even in the end, let's say, he screws over everybody. But at least, he's being honest sometimes. And I think this is what most American people, whether they're Arabic or not, voted for him, because they at least can get some truth from him. And that's why people voted for him. And they're hoping that he can continue, at least say some truth while he's governing. Everybody knows that the American government is not good for its people, whoever is in charge. But at least let us have a good show, and that includes some facts, not all delusion by delusion,
Yeah, he's the one who's like, we're just taking the oil, stealing the oil, taking the oil. It's like the most shameless, honest thing in the world, right?
It's better, it's better.
Yeah, I agree with, and look, every so often getting some level of reality as opposed to somebody lying to you, you'll take it even if you don't like it, right? Laith Marouf, he is an award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. You can follow Laith Laith, I always ask you for this. Where are you today? You're on, I have cmacenter.org in my document, but I don't think that's right. You're in a different.
freepalestine.video is the community television station that I'm the executive director at. We are producing content from the ground in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and in Jordan, and all in English. Daily news reports. You can see freepalestine.video is the website, and we're on at least 12 different social media platforms. You can follow us there. Please donate, if you have an ability to do so.
Fantastic, man. Thank you for this, Laith. I really appreciate it. Be safe, man.
You have a nice day.
Alrighty. Fantastic interview. I really appreciate Laith joining me for this. I wanted his take on it because I brought him on the show to have this conversation about what is taking place in the area several times. And so it felt right to get his point of view on this. People have a right to be cynical about this. And, they have a right to be cynical for all sorts of reasons, one of which is the U.S. duplicity on this issue. We have never been an honest actor on this issue. And because we haven't been an honest actor, how, does it really take this kind of mind-blowing conception that Israel initiates a conflict? And what does the U.S. do? Does the U.S. get Israel back in line? Or are they going to say, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, even if it's blowing off the agreement and bombing X and Y? I mean, think about Lebanon, for example. They've supposedly accepted a deal in Lebanon, despite the fact that they've been bombing ever since. And so what takes place here? In the same way that Joe Biden would say, well, they're not going to go into Rafah, or we're going to cut their weapons, or if they don't allow at least 300 trucks into the area, we may stop their weapon shipments. Okay, all of this stuff was nonsense. Everybody knew that they were lying through their teeth from the very beginning. And yet the lying commenced. It was transparent. It was shameless. There seems to be this kind of amorality in regards to the truth, meaning they didn't necessarily even care what the truth was. They were just telling you what they thought, or not even what they thought, what they wanted you to believe. And so is Trump going to be any different on this front? People have a right to be cynical. What's coming out of the Israeli government, though, comes across as blame. And what I mean by blame, and I know when somebody's using the term blame, they're using it in a negative context. But from outside that bubble, they're giving credit. I hope that makes sense. Whereas you get like channel 4 in Israel effectively saying, we didn't realize that Donald Trump was going to force us into a deal like this. We thought it was going to be something different. Okay, again, that's blame. They're blaming him for this deal, which gets across this kind of implicit assessment that they consider it to be a failure. This is not necessarily what they wanted. From an Israeli point of view, they were riding high on the hog. We've destroyed Hezbollah. We've destroyed Hamas. We've been able to get our guy into Lebanon. We've taken parts of Syria. We've annexed the Golan Heights and even more territory. We are riding high. And then to have to take a deal where the explicit interests, or let's say the enunciated interests of the Israeli government, specifically being led by Netanyahu, was to destroy Hamas politically, economically, and militarily. Hamas is still there. Now, a question and a negotiation is going to take place in regards to what Gaza looks like after the fact. And for that matter, what happens to the West Bank? Is it possible that Donald Trump got this deal by basically promising the West Bank to Netanyahu or the Israeli government? Basically, we will stand aside and allow you to annex the West Bank. But I need a deal from you in relation to Gaza. Now, this brings up all sorts of questions, as Laith Marouf pointed out. If indeed they go through with trying to annex the West Bank, what happens in Gaza? Does the deal last? What happens in Lebanon? Does that deal last? There's already people in Lebanon having this conversation that the moment that the ceasefire ends, hostilities are going to resume. So, you can just kind of see the contours of chaos that's forming even as this deal comes to light. What is going to be the political situation in Gaza? And if indeed you get a situation where Hamas still runs Gaza, Will Israel resume hostilities? I have no idea. I don't think they know either. Meaning, I would imagine that there's all sorts of plans and plans and plans, but what that looks like in real terms, who knows? I guess my point is people are cynical on some level about this deal, even though they may be hopeful about it, meaning they want it to look a particular way. They want it to go a particular way, but how does it turn out? I have no idea. There's this other question about the humanitarian assistance. Where is it going to come from? Who's going to give it? And what is it going to mean? Is it going to be able to get materials into the areas that would need it? How much money would it cost to rebuild Gaza? And who's going to rebuild it? Is this going to be money from Saudis and from the other Gulf states? Like, what does that look like? And does that humanitarian assistance create a political weight to be able to dictate terms in Gaza itself? And does it translate into political might? Basically, who rules? Who runs the area? Will there be elections? And if Hamas wins those elections again, then what? Like, all of these things come to fruition, and especially with the West Bank, because that's a really big deal. With all those settlers have taken it almost as an act of faith that they can go out, kill, maim, beat, steal from the Palestinian population, that the government will back them on it. And the government has backed them on it because there will be military standing there as the settlers go kill, maim, beat, and steal from the local populations, with the idea that if the local population responds, then they will be killed by the military because the military will get involved. This area is fraught with difficulty. And I know Israel believes that it's riding high in this case. Be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for. Any way you look at it, though, Hamas is still there. And the fact that they're still there on some level gets across that Israel was not able to accomplish its war aim, despite the fact that it was prolifically killing the population. So yes, as I pointed out over and over and over again, winning a war is not the amount of people that you can kill. Killing people is a means to an end. That's not the goal. The goal is whatever the war aims were when you initially started the conflict. And yes, the Palestinian population has experienced a devastating, apocalyptic injury, to put it mildly. I don't think that anybody would debate that at all. By the same token, the resistance group that was there resisting is still there. And the objective to get rid of that group has not been accomplished. If you want to call that a win, fair enough, maybe a Pyrrhic victory, but they're there nonetheless. And there are questions about what happens because they're there in the later stages of the negotiation and whether those later stages remain intact. I'm going to go to my guests. We are joined with the one and only, the man of the hour, Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. In his new book, or his previous book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in parts examines the life of Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing political discourse and geopolitical stage. Caleb, I'm going to have to update that. Kamala Harris is no more, even though the book is still there. Do you have any more recent books, by the way?
Oh, yeah. I wrote the book about Brian Thompson and the danger of an American Years of Lead.
Yes.
Yeah. And for a while, Amazon wouldn't let me put it up. So I took Brian Thompson out of the title. I just called it The Danger of an American Years of Lead, and Amazon allowed it to go through. So it's up on Amazon now. They apparently have a ban on books with names related to recent tragic events. So I was able to get it through on Amazon. Yeah, pretty ridiculous.
What the hell is with the censorship stuff? I mean, they are acting like reality is the issue, right? I mean, like I remember when January 6th happened, and people who were reporting on January 6th, and I mean, like, literally just a video camera watching what was taking place. Videos, by the way, that they used in Congress. YouTube was penalizing those channels, my channel being one of them. And again, the only thing it did was show what was happening in real terms, like just a depiction of reality. That's all, just a clear depiction of reality. And they're like, we don't like that. That's problematic. And it's like, dude, it's what happened. Nobody is like for you to put in Brian Thompson in the title, a CEO got whacked. And whether they like it or not, a CEO got whacked. I hate this stuff. I mean, they do this stuff all the time, even on YouTube. And I know I'm complaining because on my channel, it gets demonetized when I'm doing videos on things that are literally happening. It's just aggravating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I find it amusing. I mean, now that Facebook doesn't have fact checkers anymore, I think that's awesome. That's great because the fact checkers were always running a very, very biased job.
Yes.
And the fact that there's just this outrage. I think Joe Biden even mentioned that in his closing address. He said, there's no fact checkers anymore. It's like, good. Clearly the fact checkers were there to do a job to serve the establishment. So the outrage about that just kind of shows you how negative of an influence those fact checkers really were.
Yeah. I mean, they were like, I always ask the question, is the fact checker going to point out that the government is lying about whatever the government is lying about? So when Joe Biden, when that paper came out in NBC News that effectively said that Joe Biden was using disinformation in a propaganda war, and they were talking about it in these triumphant ways, like this is a great thing that Joe Biden is lying to the American public. It's like, what the hell? Are you serious? Right? Or the Hunter Biden laptop, or the 51 intelligence officials with the fact checkers ever called that stuff out? And of course, the answer is no. When Joe Biden said Putin is trying to take over all of Europe, is the fact checker going to point out, okay, this makes no sense. They started off with 150,000 people. That's not enough for Ukraine, let alone all of Europe. No, they're not. Like, meaning the fact checker is going to have a very specific point of view in a context that is going to drop the larger context of whatever they're talking about because they're only going to fact check certain things. I agree 1,000%.
No, I remember when Trump was first running for president, I was sitting in the newsroom at RT watching one of his campaign rallies. And Donald Trump said what he said throughout his campaign, which is he said Hillary Clinton literally started ISIS, right? And he said that many times. And CNN below it said, Hillary Clinton starts ISIS. False. ISIS started by al-Baghdadi. And I'm just like, oh gosh, the joke somebody made, it's like, Donald Trump calls Elvis king of rock and roll. False. Musical genre has no hereditary titles. You got him. I mean, it's just like, it's like on that level of,
petty.
That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it comes across as petty.
And, there's that website, Snopes.com, right? And if you look at that, right, they have like in big letters, like green and true, like yellow mixed and red false. And often if you actually read the article then that goes with it, it's a much more nuanced and complicated answer.
Yes.
But whether they give it a green or a yellow or a red is a very political thing because they know most people are not going to actually read the article. Right. Yep. And you'll notice that in that, they'll label things false. And if you read the article, it's not really false. They'll label things true. And it's like, well, it's kind of true, but not really. But that initial label is a very, very political thing because most people won't actually read the article. And as they always say, the truth is stranger than fiction. And often you can't just say true or false to these things. They're much more complicated than that. So you can't just say true or false to, like Hillary Clinton started ISIS. Well, did she literally start? I mean, she literally called up people and said, hey, let's establish the Islamic State. No, of course not. But her policies funding radical extremists led to the creation of ISIS. That's what I assume Donald Trump was saying. So.
Yeah, that's my take on it too. That was the way I thought he was going at it. If you're knocking over governments, you're creating destabilization. There's going to be consequences to that destabilization. Yeah, I think he's looking at it in those terms. I have to start here. This happened yesterday. Speaking, since we're having this conversation about journalism, and this was at the State Department. And I'm fascinated by this because Blinken specifically, but also Matthew Miller, have been getting their comeuppance. People have been giving them tongue lashings. There was a woman the other day who's like, you are a monster. You have no empathy. You're a war criminal. You're out here murder. Like just astonishing tongue lashing that he has earned, by the way, after somebody told him the truth for once. But this happened to Sam Husseini. Now, he has been on our show on Fault Lines. I've met him once or twice, and I've paid attention to him over the course of the last few years as he has dealt with the press around this genocide and having to deal with people like Blinken and Matthew Miller shill, lie, and cover for a literal genocide. This was him in the briefing yesterday getting dragged out. Just outrageous.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did
Wait a minute. That's Matt Blumenthal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Blumenthal first, and then I'll bounce to Hussein.
you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May? We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing. Why did you sacrifice the rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you allow my friends' homes in Gaza to be destroyed when we had a deal in May? You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating it with fascism. You waved the white flag before
We'll have the time to take
Netanyahu.
questions at the end.
You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
We'll have the time to take questions
Your
at the end.
father-in-law was an Israel lobbyist. Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
At last, when you smirk through a genocide, it's so true, because Matthew Miller literally smirked through a genocide day after day after day. Give me your take on that first. I mean, clearly, this was meant more as a tongue lashing. I don't know if he really expected those questions to be answered in that case. It was kind of just this righteous anger at what has been taking place over the last year, and the way that the government, especially these kind of, let's say, appendages of that government, came out to cover for it day after day after day without necessarily giving an honest account of what was happening. So there's that. Give me your take on that before I go to Sam Hussein.
Well, when he said, are you compromised by Israel? That's a really fair point. And it really shows that all this stuff about foreign meddling and all of that, I mean, there's such a huge double standard when it comes to Israel. Israel is able to get away with everything. I think we have a law that if you, join the military of any foreign country, you automatically lose your citizenship, right? If you join the army of another country, except Israel. Israel is the exception to that. And there's just so many ways in which Israel, a foreign country that has interests that are opposite to the United States, a foreign country that has killed American military personnel on the USS Liberty intentionally, not accidentally, a country that spied on the United States. I mean, they are able to just have a free pass from all of this, and, being courted by Israel, being tied in with the Israel lobby, being funded by, I think there were recent primary elections where Israel was taking credit for candidates who lost and candidates who won. But we're all supposed to be upset about foreign meddling from Russia. Oh my goodness, some memes or bots, shared some things on Facebook or Twitter or something. It's ridiculous. And when he says, "Are you compromised by Israel?" It shows how embedded powerful foreign interests from Israel are within our government. I also, I do want to give Max credit because, we know Max Blumenthal for his great journalistic work with the Gray Zone and such. But let's remember that Max Blumenthal's father is Sidney Blumenthal, who was a very important advisor to Hillary and Bill Clinton. And so, Max Blumenthal comes out of the circles in Washington, D.C., where Israel exercises its influence and such. And so he sees how awful all of this is and has decided that he needs to stand up against this and loudly oppose it. So I think it's quite admirable, that he's been willing to take on this cause and such. So that was quite a video, quite a day at the State Department, and seeing the response of CNN to both Max Blumenthal's,
Oh, I'm going to get to that. I have that clip also. But first, let me get to Sam.
We'll get to that. All right, go ahead.
Because again, it's outrageous. It's a man is getting dragged out of the State Department by goons as they just court him away. As he said, "I'm just sitting here. I'm trying to get a question answered."
Gaza City said simply, "We are being reborn." It's also a moment of historic possibility.
You can leave, sir.
Again, I'm happy to address questions.
No, I want him to answer this question.
I look forward to answering
He's going to
questions.
speak for an hour.
Thank you.
It's been lots of speeches.
Thank you.
I mean, there's some questions.
I look forward to answering questions. Thank you.
Instead of making another speech every
Sir, would you like to be escorted out?
Go away. I want to
Thank
answer
you.
questions.
I look forward to answering questions in a minute.
I'm a
Thank
journalist.
you.
I'm not a potted plant.
Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions in just a minute. Thank you.
Miller has explicitly told me he will not answer my question. Thank you. And justify
So-
what I'm doing.
I have no greater pleasure in this job than crossing off a list I carry in my pocket, the names of those who have been arbitrarily detained and unfairly held hostage, unjustly held hostage, and bringing them home, returning them to their families, returning them to their loved ones. Finally,
Get your hands off me.
this morning,
Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Get your hands off me. Answer a damn question.
I look
Do you know
forward to
about the
answering
Hannibal
questions in
Directive?
minutes.
Do you know about Israel's nuclear weapons? Everybody from the ICJ. I was sitting here quietly, and now I'm being manhandled by 2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking
Please, sir,
questions.
respect the
Wasn't the
IC?
wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders. You
Please, sir, respect the process. Thank you.
oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International. From Amnesty International to the ICJ saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague?
Just why aren't you in The Hague? Why aren't you in The Hague? I'm just trying to answer a question. And to his point, he has been asking damn good questions. And that's, part of the issue with him being there. It's like, dude, we're just trying to have a genocide and you're making our lives difficult. Give me your take on that. I like I said, I've watched Sam for over a year and a half do that specific job where he's being one of those people who are asking real legitimate questions to challenge this government and this administration in pursuit of this genocide. And there's something disgusting about the whole, well, respect the process. What do you mean respect the process? You were murdered and back the murder of tens of thousands of babies and kids. And you're telling us, well, you should respect the process in this. It's just outrageous. I want to get your take on it. And I want to go to CNN's response to what was taking place. Because I think it's indicative of why people hate the media. But give me your take on this.
Well, it's really shocking to watch. It's like they're dragging him out. They got one guy, on his head, one guy on his feet, and another guy, and they're taking 3 guys are dragging him away from his chair. And I've been to State Department briefings before, and I've asked questions to State Department officials, and they always are talking about freedom of the press. It's like an obsession. Every press, conference, every briefing they have there, they'll talk about some journalist somewhere in some country that, of course, the American government doesn't like, who's being persecuted, and how much they believe in freedom of the press and freedom of speech, and they're fighting for the rights of journalists, and they're fighting for the freedom of the press around the world. And it's like in that very room where they're constantly pontificating and reflecting about, we got to protect journalists and freedom of information, and we got to stop China from oppressing journalists, we got to stop Russia from oppressing journalists. Here's some journalist in Venezuela got arrested for this, and they're constantly condemning countries in the world. And then in that very room, they drag this guy out for asking questions about what Israel is doing. At that point, they just don't have any credibility with which to stand. This is absurd. You couldn't make this up. You almost have to wonder if they almost wanted to show the world this, like they did this to demonstrate to the world that, we're going to keep talking about free press, but we can still, pull out our iron fist if we want to. Like this was like a display of force to like subtly send a message or something, because it's like absurd. They didn't have to respond this way to this guy.
Nope.
They could have given him a non-answer. They're very good at giving non-answers at the U.S. State Department. They do that a lot. So why not just give him a non-answer like always? Why did they respond this way? I mean, what was going on there?
I don't know. He clearly annoyed them in the way or in the questions that he was answering. This is CNN's response to all of that. And you would think that journalists would back journalists, right? Like, even, I got to be honest, even for like RT and Sputnik, you would think that they would have this kind of assessment that we need to protect all of us so that we're not picked off one by one when we're putting out reports or stories that we don't necessarily like. I thought that was true with Assange. I thought that was true with journalism in general, but that's not the way it works. There's an us and a them. That's the way they look at it. CNN is clearly part of the us crowd in the way that they think about themselves. Hussein, not so much. So this was CNN's take on that. I mean, they didn't have the same point of view, I think, that we have on this.
What I would call less mainstream journalists, more opinion journalists, who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House, and to ask questions of the representatives of that administration. So I'm always amazed by whenever I go to these different press rooms about who's actually sitting there. It's not just Americans, it's people from all over the world, from Turkey, from China, from South Korea, who get to ask questions of people like Matt Miller at the State Department or Karine Jean-Pierre.
By the way, Sam is American.
Yeah.
Sam is American. So, you know, I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but this stuff all around the world. But I'm sorry. And even this notion of, I'm surprised by seeing independent journalists there. Because what, from his point of view and his conception, they're not supposed to be there? Does he fully get the hatred that America has for the mainstream media and this notion of lack of credibility? Like, these people sit in these ivory towers as if, you know, oh, we are the pinnacles of journalism. We are the people who America comes to when we need to get information. That's not true. Looking at the way America sees these people and despises much of the information that comes out of them. Democrats are more in line with what the mainstream media is saying, but even Democrats look at these people with a certain amount of derision. I'm sorry. It's just the idea that he's making this argument of, I'm shocked to see some of these people. I mean, there are people all over the world who are sitting here, and these people aren't necessarily mainstream. Sam is an American, every bit as an American as this asshole who's saying this. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to the beginning. It just annoys me.
As you heard, he was repeatedly interrupted by some cringeworthy heckling by activists. I mean, we were both sitting here pretty stunned, frankly. This is supposed to be a press conference with a room of journalists. Those were activists who were interrupting the Secretary of State when he initially was thanking the press and talking about the Israeli-Hamas deal.
Yeah, I think it's really surprising. A lot of our viewers will have seen protests on Capitol Hill, for example, during confirmation hearings, but it's very rare for something like that to happen at the State Department. I'm over there all the time in that briefing room, and you need to have a reason to be at the State Department. You need to have an appointment. You need to have press accreditation to come and go. So it's unclear who those people were. So I think there's a real security question there.
Not unclear who they were.
This is a testament to American democracy and the way that American administrations approach their press rooms. They give accreditation to a wide number of journalists, and increasingly what I would call less mainstream journalists, more opinion journalists, who have the opportunity to go to the State Department, to go to the White House, and to ask questions of the representatives of that administration. So I'm always amazed by whenever I go to these different press rooms about who's actually sitting there. It's not just Americans, it's people from all over the world, from Turkey, from China, from South Korea, who get to ask questions of people like Matt Miller at the State Department or Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House.
He said, I'm not sure who they were, and that maybe there's a security issue here because, you know, we need to get accreditation in order to be here. Well, by definition, if they need to get accreditation to be there, obviously they have accreditation. It's not like the State Department is letting people in willy-nilly. They're clearly journalists. And his thing is, well, I don't know who these people are. There's clearly a security reason. And then goes to this idea of implying that he is not from the United States. Just outrageous. And one more point. Having a journalist dragged out of the room is a display of democracy. Just Give me your take, man. It's just amazing.
Well, it's interesting because ABC News openly operates in Russia. They ask press questions to President Putin. They operate. RT doesn't operate now because of sanctions. RT
right.
has been shut down in America because of sanctions, etc. And there's many other examples of that. So, when he's sitting there saying, oh, we allow that. No, actually, the United States has made it very difficult for media outlets they don't like to operate. I
no longer have a job because of them not, being okay with these media operations. And God, man, you make a really good point. Europe has gotten rid of RT and Sputnik entirely. They did it before we did it here in the United States. The US has also did it. But you have Western outlets in Russia, or for that matter, covering events that are in Russia. And I remember that British guy got asked, hey, do you think it's fair that you can operate here in Russia when we can't operate in your country? And of course, they don't have an answer for that because the answer is damning it by itself.
Yeah. And also when he's talking about, it's so inclusive, and it's like, what is the headline there on CNN? They're showing a guy getting dragged out, interrupted Anthony Blinken when he was speaking. It's like, no, somebody got violently dragged out of the room. Look at your screen. The headline is not somebody was rude and interrupted our great elected official. The headline is somebody's being violently escorted out of a press conference. That's what's going on there, and it's like, that's what they're concerned about. They're not concerned that a journalist is being manhandled. They're concerned that that somebody interrupted the great Anthony Blinken. He was having his end of the Biden administration press conferences. One of these rude little people from these non-mainstream outlets, that, my goodness, how dare they even let them in the room? They're doing them a favor, and he interrupted him. It shows you that they are so obviously just on the side of the press. There's, of the powerful and the government itself, that they are just not even concerned about what's taking place there. Just like they sat back and let Julian Assange be persecuted, didn't speak up for Julian Assange. Just like they were very silent about when the U.S. government went after the Uhuru movement and tried to equate their activism in the Black community with being foreign agents and drag them into federal court. And CNN was very silent on that. There's just many examples of this where CNN is just is just blatantly the voice of the U.S. government. It's pretty wild because CNN is technically a private company, but CNN is shown in all the airports. If you go to the airports, they show CNN. And CNN, we say in the United States we don't have state media, right? But we do, right? We have corporate media that is very well embedded and connected with the state. It may not be directly run by the state, but Anderson Cooper has admitted the way he got his start, the way he became what he is, was from the CIA. He actually says it was his working for the CIA that got him his start in media. So right there, it's not, you don't need to know about Operation Mockingbird, Project Mockingbird to know about it. Anderson Cooper has said, oh, how was it that I ended up being who I am? Well, I worked with the CIA for a while, and that's how I became a journalist. It's pretty blatant what's going on there. There was a recent clip, I believe, of Stephen Colbert interviewing people, and they were talking about the relationship that the CIA and the intelligence community have with the press. That was pretty obvious. It's very obvious. And what's frustrating is that they will condemn media from other countries and allege, oh, it's not really media, it's just trying to carry out intelligence goals. But American media is just, mainstream American media is just considered to be standard, and that's just the way it is, and we should just accept it. And it's like, no, we can see the connections here. The whole world can see this. Yes. This is a kind of a fallacy we frequently hear. I around, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, something became trendy to talk about in academia, in international politics. They would talk about, quote, democratic regression. I loved this. Democratic regression became this talking point. And it was about how there were all these countries like Venezuela and Russia where, they'd had a democracy, and the people then voted for a leader, and this leader won the elections, but then the leader changed society. So it couldn't be a democracy anymore. And it's just like in the article, Hugo Chavez won the elections in Venezuela, but then they said he started tampering with the independent institutions. He changed the economy. He changed the military. He changed these things, but he had public support in doing it. But these institutions were told, the media, the economy, the military, they're supposed to be, quote unquote, independent. And so if the elected president starts changing these things, it's not a democracy. Well, by independent, they mean serving the U.S. establishment, right?
Yes.
And so, that's just the way things are supposed to naturally be. And so if they elect a leader who changes the economy to serve Venezuela, changes the military to serve Venezuela, changes, things to serve Venezuela, well, then it's no longer independent. And similar with Russia. Everyone knows that Russian President Vladimir Putin is wildly popular. And he was elected to change things. But when he got into office, he changed the economy, he changed the military, he changed things. All of a sudden, it's not a democracy because these independent institutions have been changed, right? And it's like there's this feeling that everything is just supposed to de facto serve the U.S. imperialist, globalist status quo. And if you go against that, all of a sudden it's not democracy because these independent institutions are being messed with. Independent means serving them and doing what they want. And if anyone gets in the way of that, it's dictatorship, even if there's a popular mandate for doing so. It's like, if elections can actually change the world, they stop being free and fair elections. They stop being recognized as democratic because you're supposed to have an election that doesn't change anything. That's the point, right? All these papers about democratic regression, that's what they're saying. As long as the elections don't change anything, they're fair. But if you have an election and you elect a leader who then proceeds to actually change things, then it's dictatorship. This is the standard kind of analysis that you get from the United States, right? If media just de facto repeats the State Department line, it's free, independent media. But if media questions what they're saying, it's obviously propaganda, it's authoritarian, it's dictatorship, it's not real media. I mean, this is the terms that they set discourse. As long as media doesn't lead people to question things and leads people to just kind of follow the mainstream status quo, then it's free, independent media. We celebrate it. But if media starts to ask real questions, we consider it to be non-mainstream and illegitimate. And, we're happy to see them dragged out of the room and they're rudely interrupting Anthony Blinken. I mean, this is the terms of American discourse in our time.
So true. So true. Mainstream media has difficulties, to put it mildly. And look, the American public sees it. I mean, when you ask people their take on mainstream media and the credibility that they give to it, it ranks extraordinarily low. And it seems to be getting lower and lower and lower in regards to how the American public views the truthfulness of mainstream media. It's astonishing. And then this dichotomy between how the public sees them versus how they see themselves. Like they see themselves as with these pillars of institutional truth and everything else. Whereas the American public sees them as just toting a certain narrative. The American public doesn't believe they're getting truth and honesty from media, even though they do. I'll give you an example. You mentioned the Colbert one. There was the other woman, Caitlin Collins, I believe. I believe it was Caitlin. It might have been. I may be getting the person wrong, but she's a CNN host. And she was on one of those talk shows, and she said something about media being honest, and the public laughed. Right. She was like, I didn't realize that was a joke. Well, yeah, you are a joke. Like it shows perfectly this how you see yourself versus how everybody else views you and your institution. This is not the Walter Cronkite era, right? This is not like you go into these people in order to get this kind of truth and honesty with this person of integrity. That is not the way they're viewed. And the idea that they're a cheer, that man getting hauled off with these people putting their hands on him, and they're cheering that as democracy. This is the epitome of democracy.
My background, I worked for the International Action Center for Ramsey Clark, and I represented the International Action Center and Ramsey Clark and international media. And then, my first job in media was I started being the reporter of Press TV from the United Nations. And so I was credentialed. Right. So I went from being a media spokesperson for a prominent international lawyer and former U.S. Attorney General to becoming a journalist myself. And I was credentialed and I worked at the UN for Press TV. And, that was like 2013, 2014, I started doing that. And I was at the UN. I had an office in the UN. And I was in the press building with people from the New York Times, people from National Public Radio, ABC, NBC, all the outlets. And I would sit in the, there's the UN lounge where, you can have a nice, nice drink in the middle of the afternoon and hang out with people. And they have the United Nations Correspondent Association, UNCA, that has these meetings. And I would sit with these people, many of whom had gone to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and the best schools. And I would talk to them and I would be shocked. And being the UN desk for NPR or CBS News, that's a highly competitive position, right? To get into.
How little they knew. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're making lots of money and it's very competitive to get that job and all that. And I would talk to these people and I was blown away by how little they knew. Like the war in Syria, they had no idea there was another side to it. The war in Ukraine, the conflict, Euromaidan. No awareness. And I would just
sorry to interrupt. Yeah. So, because I used to always have this question: are they lying, or did they just not know? Your thing is, well, they're not lying. They just really don't know. They follow whatever the narrative is, and they just run with whatever that narrative is. They don't necessarily look into the story to understand it contextually.
Yeah, they were, I would sit with them and I would, tell them the other side of the story, and they would be shocked to hear it. Like it was like they'd never heard it before. Like the basic understanding, then there's kind of an understanding, that there's two sides to every story, and these people didn't even have that level of understanding, right? As far as they were concerned, there was one side to every story, and the fact that there was even another side, there was even another view, was just something that they had never even considered. Wow. They were just like blatant, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, it shocked me. But then on the other hand, like that's why they're in the position that they're in. They've been vetted, our educational system is very much set up to kind of reward and encourage people to think in a very obedient way. And so that's why they're in that position, right? Is they've been vetted their entire lives. Those jobs are very, very competitive, and they find the people that are the most obedient, the most compliant, the most non-thinking. I also tell people about my only CNN appearance. I was on CNN in 2013 about Syria as a representative of the International Action Center. And it was when Obama was on the brink of sending missiles to Syria. And they had me on to represent the protests that were going on. And they interviewed me. It was live on the air. And they started out talking to me. And I talked about, we should spend money on jobs and schools and all of that. And then I started talking about the Syrian rebels. And how, they've committed terrorist attacks, and how, I don't believe what's coming out about the chemical weapons attack, and the U.S. government has lied about weapons of mass destruction before. And I remember the camera crew that was interviewing me, they were physically afraid. They were, it was like, what I mean? They were very, very scared. They were really, really afraid. Like, it was almost like, we're going to get in trouble for putting this guy on the air.
Wow.
And after the interview, they were like, oh, and they were terrified, like almost like they might lose their jobs or something, because they let me say that on the air. They'd been encouraged to let a protester speak. And so they set it up, and then they didn't expect me to say what I was going to say about the rebels and about the terrorists and such. So I remember that, and I've never been on CNN ever since then. Never again was I ever invited back to CNN. So I hold with pride my one CNN appearance in 2013.
Oh, that's too funny. God, man, that's man.
But I'll tell you another thing. That was 2013. That was right when So the next day, I was in D.C. at a rally at the White House. That we had. It was the very next day, and there were anti-Assad people there, and I was shouting at them. The clip of me in front of the White House shouting at these anti-Assad people. Like, I think I shouted at one of these people that was trying to overthrow the Syrian government. I shouted, "You are a terrorist murderer."
Right.
Somebody was there, I don't know who, and filmed me shouting, "You are a terrorist murderer." They have taken that clip, and there's a Netflix documentary series called How to Become a Dictator. And they have used that clip of me multiple times in it. And I'm standing in front of the White House. I shout, "You are a terrorist murderer." And they use that as like the image of like the mob, the evil dictator whips up is Caleb standing in front of that.
Wow.
"You are a terrorist murderer."
Wow.
So I love that. I'm like the bad guy in a Netflix documentary, basically about how to become a dictator. I'm the symbol of angry mob whipped up by the dictator. And they have that clip of me. So, it shows you, the whole world was watching us back in 2013, I guess,
Yeah.
But it kind of shows you, and like there's Netflix is subtly telling people by showing the clip of me. They say the dictator, in order to take power, he whips up an evil mob, then cut to Caleb, you're a terrorist. It's like they're subtly telling people like guys like Caleb are the dangerous ones you shouldn't listen to. It's a compliment, but after that Netflix thing came out a couple of years ago, like every person I know is like, oh my God, you're on Netflix. You're the symbol of terrorist, murderer, mob. I'm just like, okay, well, I mean, it just goes to show you. But the other thing that I tell people though, and I think this is really important, is that, my organization, Center for Political Innovation, we're not huge. We don't have a huge budget, but with a small group of people, you can really influence discourse. There are so many times where, things that we talk about, that nobody talks about, we talk about them. And then suddenly, the mainstream is having to address them. It's like tap dancing really quickly to address them. And that we have a way of speaking about things that are ahead of the game. And like, I feel like our role and our influence on discourse is very, very large because we are ahead of the game. I tell people that, there was the Velvet Underground during the 1960s. That's a rock band. They would do things that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones hadn't done yet. And they were like ahead of the game. They would influence, and eventually the Beatles and the Rolling Stones would do it, but the Velvet Underground did it first. And I often feel like the kind of work that you and I do in alternative media and the kind of stuff that, we are like the political Velvet Underground. We're out there pioneering, asking questions before nobody asks them, delving into topics that are considered off limits before the mainstream media finally decides they have to address them. Like that's the role that we play. We are the pioneers of media and information and political discourse. I think it's a really great role to play. We go out and we take the risks and we ask the questions and we do things that the more mainstream outlets don't have the courage yet to do. But sometimes we do them first, and that leads to the conversation getting bigger, and then bigger forces can ask the questions.
Yeah, with the last line. I mean, in real terms, especially with social media, we have started. It's pretty wild. I mean, thinking that social media has become this kind of giant within itself, in the way that people go to it for information, even beyond the mainstream media. It's fascinating, this kind of changeover in politics that I don't really think politicians know how to deal with yet, because it's such a new frontier in the questioning. By the way, mentioning events, please talk about the event that's going to take place in DC during the inauguration. You came up with this idea, and I'm fascinated by the way people describe you. Sometimes they talk about you as a Trump supporter. Sometimes they talk about you as a fascist because you are apparently a Trump supporter. And what people don't get is that your point of view seems to be, look, man, I just want less war. And Donald Trump may be open to doing less war, and we should support him on that front if indeed he wants to go in that direction. And that he should be given credit for it if that's indeed the direction he wants to go. And we shouldn't just assume that he's going to be this kind of ogre that we can't necessarily negotiate with, or that we can't necessarily influence. Am I explaining that right? Because I don't want to mischaracterize you.
Yeah, no, I mean, during the election, our organization, Center for Political Innovation, we don't endorse any candidates, but we did go through the streets of New York City with a big banner of Trump and Kim Jong-un shaking hands that said, only peace can make America great again, showing what we thought was the best thing that Trump did when he was president the first time, which was go and try to make peace with North Korea. So, we've done that, and we're having an event on Inauguration Day themed around that. We're bringing our banner to DC for Inauguration Day. We've got another banner about a peace bridge over the Bering Sea connecting Alaska to Russia. And then at 5:30 p.m. at Hilton Garden Inn, which is 2 blocks from the White House on 14th Street, I think 815 14th Street Northwest, Hilton Garden Inn, we're having a public event, and there'll be speeches. You're going to be there. I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks. I'll be there. Peter Coffin will be there. Garland Nixon's going to be there. Dr. Wilmer Leon is going to be there. There'll be other speakers as well. And we're going to have, there's also going to be, time for different organizations to give a greeting and different people. So it'll be kind of a reunion of sorts of some of us from the alternative media sphere and some of us that have engaged in peace activism and stuff. And there's going to be good food, and it's just going to be a great evening. We are planning to live stream it. So if you can't be there in person, you can watch it online, but do come in person. We'll have food for the first 50 people. and it's going to be good food too. We're talking salmon and prime rib. So, salmon and prime rib for the first 50 people who come. The room itself, I'm told, holds up to 200. So if a lot of people come, great. But, hey, if we get 50 people there, 50 people can have some good food. My good friend Brian is going to be playing music. He's a good musician. He does a folk background. He'll be like our musician who plays music between the different talks. Everyone who comes is going to get, like a kind of a gift bag that'll have a T-shirt with Trump and Kim shaking hands on it. It says only peace can make America great again. In addition to that, you'll get some books and, like a nice gift bag, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun day, and our crew is coming into town from around the country. People are coming in from Chicago. People are coming in from Minnesota. People are coming in from Boston and different parts of the country. And we're going to be in the streets during the inauguration. We're going to be, with the Trump supporters on the National Mall. We have 2,000 copies of a pamphlet that we published that we're going to be handing out. And we're going to be in the streets with our big banner. And then that evening, we're having a reception. And I think I think this inauguration day is going to be historic. And we want to be part of it. We want to leave our mark on history. We want to be part of the conversation. So we're doing it. Yeah. Why not?
The thing that I agree with you on is something that many on the left fundamentally miss. It's this idea that, look, man, you may not like Trump, but if he does something good, you should give him credit for the things that he does well. And if indeed, he's making this argument over the course of the election that I want to end wars, not start them, we should lean into it. Meaning that should be something that we push him on, that we give him credit for, because you want him to do more of it. And if indeed he's crowd surfing, and part of the crowd surfing is getting accolades for ending wars, then we should do that. Meaning, I find it to be a worthy pursuit. I find it to be a good thing of trying to get him to stop war, whether it's coming together with North Korea, whether it's pulling out of Syria, whether it's, add in whatever conflict that you want to get him out of. Meaning, I don't want him to go to war with Iran. I don't want him to, invade Venezuela, if indeed that comes up on the marquee. I don't want him or our troops to remain in Syria. We can pull those troops out. I want us to be less hostile around the world. And if we get a president who says that's what he also wants, we should give him credit for it when he does it, hit him for it when he does it. So I agree with you.
Yeah, well, we can't expect Trump to do anything good if he does a couple good things and no one loudly applauds it and cheers for it, or he starts to move toward doing good things and there's not a demonstration of support for him, right? Exactly. We have to think about this strategically. It's not a matter of, is Trump a good guy? Is he, in his bones, the moral person? Do we morally approve of Trump? That's not the issue. The issue is that our political establishment is very, very divided. And there's a potential for things to potentially get better internationally and domestically, the potential for the FBI to maybe get reined in a little bit and stop violating our civil liberties, a potential for improving peace around the world. And we need to intervene and support whatever good could happen, in addition to just condemning the bad. I think we need to view our role as potentially changing the course of history, and that we shouldn't get into the idea that we don't have any power, that all we're free to do is complain. And that I feel like is the trap that a lot of social media discourse. It's like, the world is just kind of going to hell. And so we can complain about it, and maybe we can go viral because our complaints about it are particularly shrill or something. No, we can actually change the world. We can amplify whatever good happens. We can intervene. We can make statements. And so we should do that. And that's my feeling. So I hope that we can amplify good and move toward peace in the world. So I hope people join us in DC at our event, and you'll be there. I'll be there. So will a number of our friends and others. So it's going to be a good evening.
No, man, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate you inviting me into it. I don't think I always feel like I'm in the wilderness in regards to lefty channels or these type of events where I feel like I'm doing my own thing. I'm not necessarily pulled in. So no, I do appreciate you bringing me into this. And yeah, I think you're right. I do think there's something to be said about, because look, it's not that I think Donald Trump is anti-war. It's that he seems to be open to not starting wars, or at the very least making a deal in order to end conflicts in a way that I don't see on the Democratic side. I mean, Harris was a forever war candidate. Biden was a forever war candidate. And you find with this deal that Trump made with Netanyahu that just modest pressure was enough to get a deal. And it was the same deal that was being offered months ago And you find out, like, when you're listening to some of the reporting that's going on behind the scenes, Joe Biden never pushed on this stuff. He never, used presidential might in order to get some kind of deal. And I guess from your point of view, did Joe Biden just not push because he just fundamentally agreed with what Israel was doing? I mean, if you think of the people who are running point for this, Sullivan, Blinken goes into the Middle East and he says, I am a Jew. And you think to yourself, what? Why are you telling me that? Like, everybody already knows that you're Jewish. Why do you find that that is the thing that is pertinent to explain to the world when you are supposed to be there representing the interests of the American government, which may not align with the interests of Israel? There's something anti-Semitic about him doing that he fundamentally misses, because it comes across as foreign allegiance. I am a Jew, as if my representation is for the state of Israel, not America. We did the same thing in Lebanon, sending Amos Hochstein. Always mispronounce that guy's last name, Hochstein. We sent him over there, who was a former IDF soldier, while the IDF is murdering the Lebanese. And he is supposed to be representing the interests of America in Lebanon. Like, this stuff was so tilted in a particular direction that it was just overtly transparent in regards to what they were doing. I guess the question that I have for you, and I'll close it on this, is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? I've asked this question a few times to various people, and I get different answers every time I ask the question. But I am curious your take on this. Is this an issue of, well, Joe Biden didn't push because Joe Biden just fundamentally agreed with what Israel was doing and creating this greater Israel? Or did Joe Biden feel powerless, disempowered, and was just weak for cognitive and physical maladies? Like, give me your take on this. Which one is it?
Well, when I saw that tweet from Trump a couple months back about how if the hostages are not returned by the time that he gets into office, they'll be hell to pay and all of that.
Yeah.
My mind immediately went ding, 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 ding. He wants to be Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan, the day he was inaugurated, the hostages, the American hostages held in Iran, were returned. And that was a huge win for Ronald Reagan. And that in the Fox News universe, Ronald Reagan is a saint. He is the greatest president we ever had. They want to put him on the dime. They want to name everything after him. Yeah, And so, there was no Twitter back in 1979 or 1980. But if there had been, Reagan would have said, "Oh, Khomeini, if you don't return our hostages," and that was the narrative. Reagan was such a tough, strong leader for America. Those hostages came back the very day he was sworn in. That was the narrative. And so it occurred to me that that's what Donald Trump would like to be, right? I mean, he would like to be, the guy who returned the hostages. And it's the same deal that was offered in May, but Netanyahu wouldn't go along with it. And the incoming Trump administration made the arm twisting moves. We don't know exactly what was threatened, but the incoming Trump administration said, no, actually take this deal or there will be consequences. Biden didn't have the political bravery to do that. I will say I am really surprised, and I looked this up just before we had our chat to make sure it was still in effect. The benediction at Trump's inauguration is going to be given by Imam al-Husseini, who is a Shia Muslim cleric from Michigan, of Iraqi descent. And that has that ever happened before in American history? A Muslim imam is going to be giving the benediction at a presidential inauguration. We were all told that Donald Trump hates Muslims, wants to kill Muslims, he's racist. Not only has he got a peace deal, which Biden couldn't do, and he's not even in office yet, and he made the peace deal happen. There's going to be a Shia Muslim imam who will give the benediction. And this Shia Muslim imam who's going to be speaking has refused to call Hezbollah terrorists, actually. The New York Post and all of that are really mad that Donald Trump is having this guy give the benediction, and he's still scheduled. They haven't pulled him yet. So that says to me, like, this could be a really interesting 4 years. We've already got a peace deal. Hopefully there's a peace deal in Ukraine soon. We've got a Shia Muslim, Iran, there's Shia Muslims in Iran. That's the religion of the Islamic Republic of Iran, their particular wing of Islam, their imam. I mean, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. So that says to me that there's potential for Trump to go in a good direction. So we shall just have to see.
Well, I'm hoping he's going to stand by it. I'm going to end wars, not start them. I genuinely hope he stands by it. I mean, look, like they said, it took Nixon to go to China. Does it take Trump to go to Iran? Like, do we get a situation where he ends the war in Ukraine, ends the conflict in Gaza, comes to some kind of new deal and arrangement with Iran? Like, is that the world that we get with Trump? I don't know, but that's my hope. We'll see. Caleb, man, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for this, and I will be seeing you on Monday.
See you
I will
Monday.
be taking the train down to DC. Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Brian Thompson, Danger of American Years of Lead. I'm going to put that into his bio. And and the Center for Political Innovation.
Yes.
That's the other one.
Yep.
My man, thank you for this, Caleb. I really appreciate you, my man. By the way, you're on Twitter. Are you still on Twitter at Caleb Maupin?
I am. Real Caleb Maupin. Real Caleb Maupin.
Caleb Maupin. All right, let's put that in. My man, you have a good one, man. Thank you, Caleb. I really appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Yeah.
All right. Love that guy. I really appreciate his take. He has a sophisticated mind in the way that he talks about this stuff. And it's always funny to me in the way that he's characterized, because how he's characterized is not in it's not necessarily there when you talk to him. It's just bizarre. People have these kind of weird takes. But either way, Caleb is awesome. We are going to be at the event in DC. The point of the event is try to agitate for Trump to go in a different direction in regards to foreign policy than the orthodoxy. And look, I will give the benefit of the doubt in this, that he says, I want to stop wars, meaning I want to end wars, not start them. I hope that's what he does. And I hope that's the case across the world. I mean, keep in mind, for all the bellicosity that Donald Trump exhibited when he went into the United Nations, he was willing to make a deal with Kim Jong-un in a way that had never been done. I mean, up to that point, you had just complete agitation. And what was the media's response to the president trying to bring hostilities down with North Korea? Derision. Outright, complete derision. How dare you go talk to Kim Jong-un? What is this, an American president lowering himself to have a talk with a leader of North Korea? As opposed to just allowing a situation to persist when North Korea continues to fire missiles into the Sea of Japan. Or for that matter, as they are now after the Biden administration, getting that much more proficient in their nuclear armaments and their nuclear capabilities and those missiles' abilities to hit the US. This is not a good outcome. But this is the outcome that Biden and Harris was going to allow all across the world, with creating hostilities and fires everywhere. And so if you get a president that says, yes, I'm willing to make deals and agreements. Yes, I believe in America first, and it's not America's best interest to go into one war after the next. Then yeah, between the two, I'm going to lean more towards that side of, let's stop these wars. Let's stop killing people. I mean, for God's sake, the Ukraine conflict ends up with hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, even like 100,000 dead Russians, depending upon where you're getting the data from other figures. But even on the low end, we're talking about 400,000 dead Ukrainians with maybe 1 million broken bodies, or for that matter, just outright corpses. This was Biden policy. And you can make an argument that the overthrow of the Ukrainian government under the Obama administration with Clinton, Victoria Nuland, and these creatures, these cantankerous goblins that we employ to go around the world and do this nonsense and this chaos, that, you know, that was the start. They want to always point it out, well, when Russia invaded. Okay, yeah, but 2014 was an overthrow of a democratically elected government. That was the start. And you can even go back before that in the people that we were training and radicalizing in Ukraine. So, you know, if you get a president that says, A, that wouldn't have started with me, and B, I could end it. And you see the movements that he's been making even before getting in office, then maybe that's a recipe for hope. I don't know. I've become cynical over my years and watching the stuff that has taken place. And as I've told you before, when I was working in the newsroom and I'm sitting there watching events on the ground, and you have the ability to kind of correlate media from all around the world, and you look at US media and you're like, these people are just liars. Like, their take on this stuff is so warped and so politically motivated that this idea that we don't have state-run media in this country is just laughable. CNN is, for all intents and purposes, state-run media. MSNBC, Fox News. These news organizations float within a certain range that they feel comfortable with talking about. It's just unfortunate that that range tends to be just whatever the State Department tells it is true. So Ukraine says something. There was North Korean soldiers are having wave attacks on Ukrainian positions, which is why Ukraine is losing. Okay, show me one. Show me one. But when you write that story, looks like you would need to validate the fact that they are talking about massive amounts of Ukrainian soldiers being destroyed. And then at the last minute, just before death, I must destroy my face so nobody can know my identity. It puts me in mind of David Chappelle. David Chappelle had this act where he was talking about how he was like, you weren't a little bit suspicious that all of these people who were being killed by cops had crack sprinkled on them? And he was making this thing about like somebody getting shot and then turn around this, I want to leave no answers or no questions about my death. So he sprinkles crack on himself after he gets shot. That's what it put me in mind of. It's like there was these barrages, these waves of North Koreans that were killed. And they just was like, I want to leave no questions. And so they burn their faces so nobody can see who they are. Stuff is nonsense. My point is the media repeats that stuff religiously as if this just so happens to be true, whether or not they can back it up or have anything to back it up at all. It's astonishing. You see that, and when you see that happening over and over and over again, you feel like you're in a funhouse. You feel like you're in this kind of weird Twilight Zone-esque reality where the things that they're talking about are just fundamentally not true, but they repeat them over and over and over and over again. That is my issue with the fact checker stuff. It's like there are certain facts, quote unquote, that you would never test, that you would never check. You would never check. It's just wild to me. I want to play this clip. So I've shown this clip before of Donald Trump, so I'm not going to play that one again. I want to play Blinken. Blinken has been going on his legacy tour. And his legacy tour effectively amounts to Blinken shaping a narrative around his actions and what he was trying to accomplish during his term in office. Blinken is a complete sociopath. And he is one of those sociopaths or psychopaths, I don't know how he was raised, but clearly zero association with the truth, perfectly fine with people being murdered and slaughtered, even to the point of tens of thousands of babies. And he would go out and he would defend the murder of tens of thousands of babies on his platforms and in front of the State Department and pretty much any stage around the world. And even when you pointed out to him, they are murdering people indiscriminately, he would say Israel has a right to defend itself. Even if that baby looks at that soldier a particular way. Let's go to his clip first. This is Blinken on his farewell tour. Let's see what it says here. So this clip is on Ukraine. Now, to put this in context, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of people being killed. Hundreds of thousands of people being killed. And on top of hundreds of thousands of people being killed, 25% of the territory lost, Russia expanding daily. On top of Russia expanding daily, Ukraine getting weaker with mass desertions that they're effectively experiencing, because who the hell wants to be the last person to die in a clearly and obviously transparently losing war? With the new administration coming in and saying, yeah, we're going to put a close to this. We can't have this kind of indiscriminate spending of money where they are fundamentally lost and they are not necessarily going to get any additional gains. And so you as Blinken, who has gone out with Joe Biden saying Russia has lost the war, if you remember that, with Blinken, Sullivan, John Kirby, another sociopath, lying to the American public to give them this impression that Ukraine was either winning or that there was some kind of stalemate or that the lines weren't going to move when the lines were always moving inexorably in a very specific direction, and that is with the Russians moving further to the west. And even when the Kursk offensive happened, and I pointed out, it's humiliating for Putin for this to happen, but each and every one of those Ukrainians are going to die or get pushed out. And that is exactly what has been happening with his best forces being slaughtered. And yet, doubling down. Because from the Zelensky point of view, if you can hold on to the land, you can trade it with the Russians. By the way, that's not going to happen. They will be pushed out before that happens. The Donbass will be liberated in 2025, and that's assuming the Ukrainian military is even going to be able to stand going forward, meaning the military may just utterly collapse. This is the reason why they're trying to get children into the battle zone, trying to get 18-year-olds to carry weapons and fight the Russians, despite the fact that they have fundamentally lost the war, and everybody understands it as such. This is Blinken talking about this, because at a certain point, you have to ask the question, what was it for? What was it all for? What were the 500,000 dead Ukrainians for? What was the loss of 25% of the territory for? What was all of this for? How was this to the betterment of Ukraine? All of these people that were carrying this banner saying, we're fighting for Ukraine, we're doing this for Ukraine. All the while, Ukraine is losing more territory, losing more people, and you get the majority of the Ukrainians themselves saying, we want to end the war. Even if we need to cede territory, we want to end the war, with lunatics like Kirby, or lunatics like Blinken, or lunatics like Keir Starmer saying, we need to keep going. They were the Minsk agreements, they were Istanbul agreements. And in the Istanbul agreements, a deal that would have ended the war saw the US putting pressure on Zelensky to keep going. We will give you all the money, we will give you all the weapons, but you are going to keep fighting, even to the last dead Ukrainian. And as I pointed out before, there's something philosophically off with another country controlling your military. Because the feedback mechanism of a political system where they're losing militarily, and there's pressure inherently on that political system to either make a deal or to end that conflict. Whereas when you have somebody else controlling your military, that feedback mechanism doesn't exist. From your point of view, you can keep fighting because these aren't Americans that are dying. These are Ukrainians. This is somebody else. And we are using them as a means to an end to go after the Russians. So we don't necessarily care about Ukraine as a state, or for that matter, about the people who are losing their lives in process or in pursuit of our objectives. There's something philosophically off about this idea of another country controlling your military and your military's, let's say, operations and objectives. This is Blinken, on some level, having to explain, what was this all for? What was it for?
The line is drawn on the map at this point, I don't think is fundamentally going to change very much. The real question is, can we make sure that Ukraine is in a position to move forward strongly?
That the areas that Russia controls, you feel will have to be ceded?
Ceded is not the question. The question is, the line as a practical matter in the foreseeable future is unlikely to move very much. Ukraine's claim on that territory will always be there.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. He doesn't want to say that, but the answer is yes. If you notice, she was like, you mean it has to be ceded? As a practical matter, the line is not going to move much. The line is continuously moving every day. Just to be clear, the line is literally continuously moving every day, with Ukraine getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and Russia taking more and more territory. Petrovsk is now surrounded. And you're going to get to a point where there is nothing else behind that line because they hadn't been building defensive barriers. So he's stuck in this weird, humiliating spot where he has to admit, yes, they would have to cede that territory without saying they have to cede that territory. Let's keep going. Just fantastic.
There. And the question is, will they find ways with the support of others to regain territory that's been lost. I think the critical thing now going forward is this. If there is going to be a resolution, or at least a near-term resolution, because it's unlikely that Putin will give up on his ambitions. If there's a ceasefire, then in Putin's mind,
Putin's ambitions was for a neutral Ukraine. That was his ambitions. His ambitions was for the Ukrainian government to not murder the Eastern Russian Ukrainian population. His ambitions was for the Russian language, or for that matter, the political parties in Ukraine that might have leaned more towards the ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the East to be allowed, for the attacks not to happen on the church. Meaning his aims is not necessarily insane. This notion of expanding NATO to the border of Russia was always going to be a red line. It was always understood to be a red line, but the sociopath can't admit that. It can't accept that. The expansion hasn't been Russia invading these other countries in this kind of imperialistic fervor. It's been NATO expanding to the border of Russia, putting a hostile military organization on the border. Over and over again, Putin has been willing to negotiate. The Minsk agreements were negotiations. But what happened? You get Angela Merkel and Hollande coming out saying, we lied. We entirely entered into negotiations in order to allow Ukraine to build up a massive military. So a deal that should have fundamentally ended the conflict was used as a way to effectively preempt and get Ukraine prepared for a conflict, the very conflict that the deal sought to end. So don't give me this nonsense that the belligerent party here is Putin, or fundamentally that Putin is the issue. The U.S. overthrew a democratically elected government, meaning the actual government of Ukraine at that point had been destroyed. And after that government was destroyed, many of these regions looked at it and said, this government is no longer legitimate because the democratically elected government has been destroyed. Blinken cannot give an honest sentence on this, and has never given an honest sentence on this particular issue. I'm going to let him keep going, just to let him finish his thought.
the ceasefire is likely to give him time to rest, to refit, to reattack at some point in the future. So what's going to be critical to make sure that any ceasefire that comes about is actually enduring is to make sure that Ukraine has the capacity going forward to deter further aggression. And that can come in many forms. It could come through NATO, and we put Ukraine on a path to NATO membership.
He's out of his goddamn mind. He's out of his goddamn mind. If you honestly believe that the Russia, and this is precisely why Russia is not going to allow a freezing of the conflict. Lunatics like this. Because in his mind, a freezing of the conflict just allows Ukraine to rearm in order to get to a certain point where it once again attacks. It once again tries to take back its territory in the way that he said. Those people voted to leave. Those people voted to leave because Ukraine had been bombing the shit out of those people. Let's be very clear. The entire point of this test of strength, to frame or to take a term, has been to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. This lunatic is still talking like, well, at some point, Ukraine is going to be part of NATO. No, it's not. It's the entire point that this war is happening in the first place.
It could come through security assurances, commitments, guarantees by different countries to make sure that Russia knows that if it reattacks, it's going to have a big problem. That, I think, is going to be critical to making sure that any deal that's negotiated actually endures and then allows Ukraine the space, the time to grow strong as a country.
Damn it, that was a mistake. Yes, lip reading. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will cut that part out in the later clip. My point is, good luck with this. This idea that Ukraine is going to somehow get back to NATO. It's nonsense. The entire point of this conflict, the entire point of this test of strength was to prevent Ukraine from becoming part of NATO, to create this, prevent this military to be added to the Russian border. I don't know the point where the sound was off, but I will go back to the very beginning of what I was trying to communicate. Oftentimes, there's this saying in Game of Thrones that power is a shadow on the wall. And what they mean by power as a shadow on the wall has a lot to do with this idea that how I regard you or how you regard me is the way I'm going to respond to you. I'm not responding to you in this reality-based assessment. It's my perception. It's my point of view in the way that I react to you. But at some point, that may get tested, meaning whether you are weak, whether I'm strong, whether it's somewhere in between, the test of strength is the thing that makes the determination of whether those perceptions are true or false. You've had a military organization for the last 50, 60 years that were geared around fighting the Soviet Union and keeping the Soviet Union at bay. Russia is an independent state. By itself, it was outproducing NATO. By itself, it was able to destroy and beat the proxy on its border that was given all the missiles, bullets, guns, intelligence that NATO could spare. And they lost. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something that Russia just snapped their fingers and it happened. They had to have a heavy toll in order to make that work. And yet they were able to do it. We're looking at something like 1 million Ukrainians that were either dead or broken as human beings. And Blinken, with that heavy lift, is basically arguing, well, at some point, Ukraine may be part of NATO. And at some point, we may have all of these other troops and everything. You've done that, meaning that was the entirety of this test of strength. That was the reason for this test of strength. And you were found lacking. The idea that you're still talking about going back to that is just outrageous. And what it seems to be is that Blinken is just beefing up this kind of fallacy of his legacy, when the reality is his legacy was one of genocide and one of outright and complete failure. He is the worst Secretary of State that we have ever had. I want to go to my guest if she is still here. There we are. No, you're perfectly fine. I was going to bring you in. Sarah Bills. She is an independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DD Geopolitics. Sarah, apparently I was lip reading for a while or given...
Not that long. It was just a little bit.
You know what? I have one of the most humiliating aspects of that. I did that for 20 minutes one time. I
do it all the time.
Oh, it's so humiliating. You're just sitting there because you're not entirely like, I'm not reading the comments constantly. Like I read them every so often, like I kind of bounce back into them. And if I have on another screen, there's no way for me to see the audience screaming at me saying, we are lip reading.
I was like, he's not going to see it. You're muted. I was like,
it's like, you're muted. But fair enough. I'll try to cut that part out. That's humiliating, is what it is. It happens.
I do it
all
all
the time. How are you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am doing fine. It's early for you. So I always appreciate you getting up this early for me. I thank you for that. KJ is also in California, and KJ ends up coming here so early in the morning. Joe Biden, Blinken, all of these people are giving their legacy tours at this point. Joe Biden, in fact, I want to get your take on something. So Joe Biden said, oh, by the way, before I get to that, TikTok. So after all of the pressure that was being applied to TikTok, after them saying they were going to get rid of TikTok, after the Supreme Court did their ruling and going into whether they're going to keep TikTok or not, Joe Biden has come out and effectively said, or the reporting is, that they're not going to move on TikTok.
No, they're leaving it.
That they basically did all of that threatening, they passed all of that legislation, all to get to the point of saying, well, I'm not going to enforce it. I'm just going to pass it to Trump. Isn't that amazing? Do you think it was all a bluff?
I don't know, but they created quite a mess, whether it was a bluff or not. I think that in that instance, the toothpaste is out of the tube. You're not going to get these kids back to TikTok now. They're having so much fun talking to their Chinese counterparts.
Yep.
I think that that's what happened, maybe, is that they saw that, people were flocking to Red Note. There's been so many wonderful conversations about medical bills and student loans, and they were like, crap, like we better not make this decision final, because it could turn into a national security issue for them anyway. One of my favorite stories was one of the Chinese netizens said, "Hey, Americans, do you really have to pay for ambulance rides, or is that propaganda that our government tells us?"
It depends on the state, I suppose. I mean, I remember when they were telling people they had to pay for, in Richmond, at one point we did have to pay for, they had to pay for ambulances if you got sick or ill or something like that. It's humiliating. And it's like the richest country on the planet, and yet we can't appropriate our resources to ensure that people are fed, or people have their medical bills covered, or people can get an education in order to improve their social, or for that matter, intellectual standings. That stuff should just be part of a society that we ourselves decide upon and say, yes, this is something that is to the betterment of each and every person in our society, and that's what we're going to have. And then when they get the opportunity to see other countries, Europe, or for that matter, China, and they're like, wait a minute, you mean people actually get these things? You mean governments can come together and make a choice and say, hey, these are things that we prioritize because, they're in the best interest of our country? Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It's kind of always like these places that our government tells us are run down third world, no plumbing, China, Russia. And then, you go there, or you wind up on Red Note, and you're like, oh, it just kind of blows these people's minds. And they're like, oh, you guys have running water. I mean, one of the netizens said, I mean, Chinese healthcare can get kind of expensive. I paid $60 for an operation the other week, and the Americans were showing their medical bills, and the Chinese people were like, and then, you'll be like, well, why can China have free medical care? And then comes the next slide. Oh, well, they have it, but their economy is falling apart. So they won't have it for long because it destroyed their economy.
It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. I tell you this, I was in Egypt. And I was at a clinic in Egypt. I have to get treatments periodically. And as I was sitting in the clinic, a guy comes out, German. He also offers me a cigarette. I thought he was Egyptian. I didn't even realize he was German, but whatever. He offers me a cigarette. Him and I are sitting there smoking. And he turns to me, he says, how much are you paying for this? He knew I was American. Americans, you don't have to open your mouth for people to know you're an American. And I say, yeah, I had to pay $250 for this. And he's like, really? He says, my government covers this. Basically, not only is the healthcare free in Germany, I mean, they pay through their taxes, but if they go to another country and have to get treatment in another country, their insurance in Germany also covers the costs in that other country. And I'm sitting there like,
I had to get traveler's insurance.
Yeah. It's like, thanks for that, bro. It's like, thanks for letting me know that. But as I told him, the moment that you leave America, your insurance stops. There is no, if you had Medicare, if you had Medicaid, that stuff stops the moment that you leave the border. If you had any kind of insurance, it stops when you leave the border. That is not true for other countries in Europe. Just astonishing.
It is.
Wow. I'm glad those kids were getting a lesson on that stuff. Good for them.
It's great. And they're all learning Chinese.
And they're all learning Chinese.
It couldn't have gone better than this. It really couldn't have gone better than this.
It's what they get. I mean, it's like, because the same thing they're doing to TikTok is the same thing they did to RT and Sputnik, where they're like, we don't like what you guys are saying. And we don't even have the reach. We don't even have that level. We never even had the level of reach that TikTok had in regards to the number of people who use the application. Their application is 1 billion people, if not more. And they were like, well, we don't like what you guys are saying, so we want to get rid of you. Okay, fair enough. It was the same thing on TikTok, where Mitt Romney was having a conversation, I believe, with Blinken. Mitt Romney was having a conversation with Blinken. And he admitted that, look, the conversation that they were having on TikTok about Israel and Gaza was let's say the inspiration for many of the political leaders to come out and get rid of TikTok. And when you listen to people like Thomas Massey pointed out that each Congress member has a Israeli minder, like somebody from like AIPAC or some of these other lobbying groups have minders watching various Congress members to engage with them on various legislation in order for them to go in a particular direction with the legislation. So it's not shocking that these people have getting paid $100 million from Israeli lobbies turn around on an application that is criticizing Israel.
Right.
It's just, it just goes beyond their, it's anti-American to go through with it though, if that makes sense. At least that's my take.
For sure. It's anti-American to take orders and bribes from of an entity that has foreign interests and then use them to make policy in America. It's wild. The whole thing is wild.
Yes, absolutely. I want to go to Joe Biden for a bit, and then I want to go to Blinken. So Joe Biden, like I say, began his farewell tour.
Ugh.
He gave his farewell speech yesterday that I kind of tore apart in my show yesterday. But I want to go to this part first. Joe Biden knew that Netanyahu was indiscriminately murdering people, regardless of what he said. He knew it. It was transparent that it was happening. But the White House kept acting like this wasn't the case. And we even got this information, I think it was DropSite, pointed out that in one of the reports that came out from the State Department, the U.S. government changed what they were coming out with because they said effectively Israel is committing starvation. And Joe Biden, White House, forced them to change the starvation angle because they didn't want to deal with the fact that they were starving the population. This is Joe Biden when having this conversation. I think he's talking to Lawrence O'Donnell. Listen to what he says here about indiscriminate murder.
When I went to Israel, immediately after their attack by Hamas, 8 days later, whatever it was, and I told him we were going to help. And I said, but Bibi, I said, you can't be carpet bombing these communities. And he said to me, well, you did it. You carpet bomb, not his exact words, but you carpet bomb Berlin. You dropped a nuclear weapon. You killed thousands of innocent people because you had to in order to win a war. I said, but that's why we came up with the UN. New deals by which what we would do relative to civilians and military.
So he was comparing 21st century war tactics, battle tactics, with World War II.
Well, what he was really doing is he was going after me for saying you can't indiscriminately bomb civilian areas.
I think what Joe Biden misses here is that
there's many things that he misses there.
Yeah, like that clip is astonishing because they were indiscriminately bombing and killing civilians. That's what they were doing.
He knew that they were going to. And the best part is, it's like, I guess that Joe Biden only has like a memory for the 20th century because we carpet bombed after the UN was made. I don't know what that had to do with that.
Yes.
That's why
it's like you were killing in Afghanistan. You were doing this
so the
in
UN
Iraq.
could bomb them with you. I don't know what this means.
That clip is astonishing. That clip is just astonishing. Like it's so much in that clip. Like they're fundamentally dropping this context that we paid for 70 to 80% of that indiscriminate killing.
Yeah.
We paid for it. We covered that. And so it's like they're having this conversation like, yeah, Bibi was going after me saying that you indiscriminately kill people. It's like you were backing him and you knew he was doing that.
Yeah.
All the way through.
I love the way he said it too. Like I love it, his senility. He's so frank. He's like a baby or like a drunk person. There's not a lot of filter, right? And he's just like, all right, Bibi, but you can't be doing that carpet bombing again. Like that was the tone. You can't be doing that again. And it was like, what he's gonna do. It's fantastic.
Just amazing.
You have to laugh to keep from crying. But I'm glad that this stuff is coming out already because we all know he's not long for this world. So it needs to come out. And these blips of they are senile, but they're also clarity with no filter are really important. That clip was incredibly telling. Telling. They know that they've been mowing the lawn when they go in there in prior engagements.
Yep.
So I mean, even when, and it's funny, the comparisons that they used, because those are Hasbara talking points. If you get into arguments, even with the lowest level pro-Israel people, they always bring up Dresden. They always bring up Nagasaki, Hiroshima. They always do. It's always it's a deflection.
Yeah.
So.
It's a deflection. I mean,
But it
not to
worked.
mention, this is a war on a civilian population. It's not like two militaries going at each other.
Not at all. And they knew that. That's terrifying.
Yeah. One of the things I want to get to also. So, Pezeshkian is in Moscow.
They just signed it while we were here.
Oh, good. Okay, they just signed the deal. So there was this conversation about what was going to be in that deal. And for the longest time, they kept saying there was going to be a security agreement, a security agreement, a security agreement. And so when they made the news today that Pezeshkian was going to Moscow in order to sign that agreement, do we know what's in that agreement yet?
I don't think that we know, but we do know it has we don't know the exact specifics. So there's a trade and investment section. It will boost the economic trades from 15%. They will increase by 15% and 3.77 billion. There would be stronger military cooperation and a stronger cultural ties. But what I think now we're doing is not a defense alliance. Russia, this is me going out on a limb. Russia's got to keep Iran back into the loop, keep them in, because Iran is liberalizing, and Pezeshkian has already shown that he's not afraid to ask the United States for sanctions lifting or what he needs to do for that. So this might be just as much about the defense of Iran as it is about Russia keeping them under their sphere of influence.
Interesting. I mean, there's a question about whether or not Donald Trump and his team is somehow negotiating back channel with Iran.
Well, I think Pezeshkian is an ineffective leader. He's just inexperienced and he's not ready. And I think he's way over his head given the geopolitical situation. Say if he was president in maybe 2010 to 2015, he might have been able to get away with it. But not right now in this huge time of regional flux. And so I think that he has a strange trust of the West that these kind of doe-eyed new westernized politicians have. Like maybe Pashinyan has that kind of, those kind of, Zelensky, right? And maybe these leaders are like, well, maybe I shouldn't trust the United States that much. And, so it could be Russia doing that. And it just feels like it's more, it's not just a military thing. It's a lot of like the cultural exchange is important. That like binds two countries together pretty tightly. So you'll see a lot of exchanges in university students, work exchange programs and stuff like that. And that'll build stronger ties, but it's probably also to keep Iran under Russia's sphere of influence.
No, that makes sense. I took it from the military angle that Israel was going to be an issue. I mean, this is fascinating to me because if indeed Donald Trump is going to go in with a pressure campaign against Iran, okay. By the same token, though, he is also trying to make a deal in order to end the war in Ukraine. It's like, okay, but these two things come in conflict with one another, especially with Russia's relationship with Iran. And so for all of this agitation that Israel wants to strike Iran, and it's like, okay, if the U.S. helps with that, then the U.S. is back at loggerheads with Russia again. Like there's these relationships are fraught with all sorts of difficulties. At the moment that you go after one, you go after the other. How do you see it in that context? I mean, do you think Israel is still aiming and angling to attack Iran? And do you think they're going to be on board for that if indeed they do?
I think that Israel is at a point where Israel's not ready to stop fighting. I don't know that they really care who they fight. They have a set options of who they need to go to war with. Yeah. So the other day they bombed HTS. So they obviously still have cleanup duty to do there. Their Negal committee came out with the report that said Israel needs to arm and get ready for posturing against Turkey. Then we have the Iran element. So Israel's got a lot of options to stay fighting a war. I don't think that they necessarily need to go to Iran now, nor do I think it would be smart. I think that they should not, this isn't what I want them to do, please understand, but I think that to be safe, they should go with Turkey. Testing out Turkey as a NATO adversary is going to be a lot easier than overextending yourself all the way to Iran and then trying to make sure Turkey doesn't really move too much in Syria. It's just too much work. Plus, there's a mess brewing in Iraq, inevitably, because the border's becoming porous again. So they have a lot of work to do in the Levant and in that kind of peninsular area. Plus, they have an issue going on in Somalia where they want to build a base in Somaliland to keep an eye on Ansarallah, and they're still bombing there. So they still have a lot of options before they even. I feel like Iran is like the final boss. There's a lot of.
No, please.
But there's a lot of just cleanup and stuff, loose ends that need to be tied up before that even becomes a thing. Because you don't know if you start going to war with Iran, is Ansarallah going to come out of nowhere and fight alongside them? Is Iraq going to fight alongside them? What's going to happen? So I think that they're better off kind of just moving along in a straight line, sort of.
What do you make of the deal with Gaza? Donald Trump apparently pushed Netanyahu into a deal. Channel 4 was complaining. They were blaming Trump in this, and I'm using the term blame because from their point of view, this is a disaster. Smotrich, what's the other name? Ben Gvir. These two creatures have effectively said they'll collapse the government if they go through with it, because from their point of view, this is a loss. There was complaints that they thought Donald Trump was going to give them more time to do more killing in Gaza and the West Bank. I mean, I'm being serious. And they were shocked that Donald Trump took this position in order to pressure them to take the deal. Now, give me your take on this, because this is complicated all the way through, whether it's going to go through, whether they're going to maintain it, whether the U.S. is going to push Israel to keep it. All of these things are questions that are just kind of looming. And what did Trump give to get it? Like, meaning, did Trump say, you can annex the West Bank and we'll back you in annexing the West Bank, but we need a deal in Gaza? Give me your take on this.
I want Ben Gvir did resign. If he does resign, it doesn't necessarily crash the government. But at the very last minute, Smotrich put up his own deal, and Bibi actually needs Smotrich more than he needs Ben Gvir. So that wasn't like the end of the world. People thought the government was going to collapse. Well, if Smotrich would have also left, which these party names are so funny. They're like Jewish Zionism and Jewish Power are the two parties. But
just think of somebody white power group.
Basically, Bibi went to him and was like, not only will I give you more power, but Smotrich wanted a guarantee that the war would restart, and it would start with a vengeance. Like, it would be like that would be like the end all be all. And whether or not that deal came through, something made Smotrich stay, because he's still there, and the ceasefire has been signed. I don't like, and I don't know if you want to get into this yet, but I don't like the Western language around this ceasefire. It's terrifying. Mike Waltz, especially the incoming admin. I'm not even talking about the old admin. They're gone. Ceasefire is gone when the old admin's gone. Or the ceasefire starts when the old admin's gone. But like Mike Waltz yesterday was like, I think Hamas would like to believe this is the end of the war, but it's not. Like, they are fully committed to going right back to war. And I really caution people from these premature celebrations, because there's no diplomacy going on here. It's a hostage exchange and a temporary ceasefire. This isn't peace by any means. We're not even close to it. Not to mention you mentioned the West Bank, the uptick in violence in the West Bank, which is getting completely out of hand. And now IOF is getting in there even more. So no, this is a ceasefire. And I feel like people are looking at it like a peace deal, and it's a reprieve. You're going to get 6 weeks maximum of no bombs, maximum. And that's to say that Israel holds to their word. What happens if what happens if Israel killed some of those hostages between now and when the ceasefire starts? Does that break the ceasefire when Hamas hands them back dead and Israel thought they were alive? Like, there's so many conditions placed on Hamas that they have to adhere to. Just wait until there's one minor slip up and Israel says, that's it, ceasefire's over. Also, whatever happened to the ceasefire in Lebanon? They've been bombing Lebanon all week. So that's the ceasefire.
Exactly. Good. Like, and that was the point I made, right? Like, apparently there's a ceasefire in Lebanon. It hasn't stopped Israel from its bombings. No. And, you could think of anything real or imagined that Hamas does that Israel once again resumes. And will the administration hold Israel accountable for doing so? The previous administration didn't. You know?
So important you said real or imagined, because they make up stuff all the time. They have full control of the North. And I don't know if your listeners, well, I hope they remember, but I remember when fighting had died down and then out of nowhere, Israel was like, oh, Hamas has regrouped in the North. And it's like, how? It's rubble and you guys have full control of it. And it's just an excuse to go in there and do training events and bomb more people. So exactly, real or imagined. Anything that they say, the Western politic just gets it, just takes it at face value. That's why I keep saying there's so many things that Hamas has to do, so many hoops that they had to jump through. It's near impossible given the situation that they're in.
There's also this other element to it, that the moment that you give up the hostages, there's nothing stopping Israel from resuming the war, right?
They said that. Mike Waltz said that last night or yesterday in an interview. He said,
well, right here, I got the interview.
Great, because I posted it last night.
Yeah, I just play it. So this is him talking about the thing, because there's this other question, right? Netanyahu, his objective was to destroy Hamas politically and militarily. Well, you get Blinken saying Hamas has reconstituted its forces in that region. Okay, fair enough. Then there's this question of, okay, well, what was it for? And then you get this thing of like, okay, well, what is the government going to look like? Because there are multiple stages to the negotiations that are supposed to take place. One is supposed to give back the hostages. Israel's supposed to give back thousands of Palestinian hostages. Hamas is supposed to give back Israeli hostages and Americans and whoever else they have holding on to. There's supposed to be humanitarian assistance being dumped into Gaza. And then there is supposed to be like this question of who's going to run Gaza? What is going to be the political organization of God? That is an open question at this point. And according to Israel, Hamas ruling Gaza is a red line, but by the same token, Hamas is not going to just, destroy itself at the behest of Israel. So this is Mike Waltz. Now, part of this could be red meat for their base, like effectively saying, well, of course, we're going to back Israel. Of course, we got them 100 or 1,000%. Just because we're bringing this to a deal doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to back our guy. Basically, giving the base what they require to shut the hell up and accept the deal. But I don't know. This is Mike Waltz.
And from your perspective, if this deal goes through and we enter what's characterized as the first phase, does that effectively mean the war is over? Does a ceasefire mean that its work is done in Gaza for the foreseeable future?
Well, I certainly think Hamas would like to believe that, but we've been clear that Gaza has to be fully demilitarized. Hamas has to be destroyed to the point that it cannot reconstitute, and that Israel has every right to fully protect itself. So, all of those pieces, all of those objectives are still very much in place.
Yeah. So I guess the question is Hamas going to commit suicide? I guess that's the question.
I don't know, but they've all even further in that interview. I think that they were like, absolutely no Hamas in this government. There will be no Hamas in this government. So obviously we know the whole romanticizing. You can't kill an idea. Well, you could sure make sure it doesn't reconstitute for a while. So I think that's kind of the game plan here. I also think that there will be.
But they've already said. Well, Blinken has already said that Hamas has reconstituted itself.
Yeah.
So
the boogeyman's back already.
Yeah. So I don't know what that looks like. And that's
the part. Like the ceasefire comes out and Anthony Blinken says, well, he's just setting it up for later, lining up the pins in case Donald wants to knock him down, and saying not only have they reconstituted, they've recruited more. They have more now than they did before. Bitch, how?
Yeah.
Well, but then the pro-Palestinian camp goes, oh, hell yeah, we're still in this. I'm like, stop saying that. You are not still in this. So they're just setting it up so later on when they say there's Hamas operations and they want to carpet bomb the place.
I mean, there is something to say, though. If you kill 10,000 babies, people are going to feel some kind of way. So it doesn't really shock me that if more people were flocking to sign up to resist at the point where it's like, my kid was killed, my nephew was killed, my uncle was killed, my teacher was killed. Like that stuff burns. How do you do that and then say, okay, now we're just going to go back to normal? I don't know how you do that.
You don't.
Go for it, please.
No, you can't. You don't. You just can't.
Yeah.
You don't come back from that. That if you have that initial feeling of vengeance, it usually doesn't go away.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
then there's this other question of, because at a certain point, they're supposed to let the people go back to northern Gaza. And it's like, there is no northern Gaza.
The moon? Send them to the
Yeah.
moon. It looks like the moon.
Yeah, they destroyed it. I was showing some of the images earlier today. Like, it is flattened. So, yeah, man. Sarah, I always appreciate talking
This
to
was a
you.
good one.
I really do. Thank you for this.
Good one.
I really appreciate it. Sarah Bills, she is independent journalist, U.S. Navy veteran, and co-founder of DD Geopolitics. Definitely check her out, especially on Twitter. I always find you and your information on Twitter. I always appreciate you. So thank you
Thank
for this.
you very much. And we will talk soon. Bye.
Absolutely. You have a good one. Be safe. All right. We have come to the end. We've come to the end. Here's this. Jamal, gotta ask, do you do interviews? Would love to have you on my show. Jabari, VOC Media. Jabari, I'm going on a show in 3 minutes. Hard Lens Media wants me on their show. So Kit hit me up. I believe this was a few days ago. I said yes. And so I'm going to be on that show in a few minutes. I guess my answer to your question is yes, I do interviews every so often. Just email me. We can see if we get together. Hopefully the show is not late at night. And the reason why I say that is, like when you have an interview, like when you get up at 5 a.m. and you're working all day from 5 a.m. going later into the evening, cutting videos, booking guests, etc. An 8 o'clock interview is rough. An 8 o'clock interview is rough. Hopefully your interview is sometime during the day. I'm also going to be on the show with Garland today. Garland and I are going to do our Friday 2 p.m. show. So yes, the answer is yes. I'll also do interviews. Let's go to the chats before we finish out. ROF Jam Radio, new member. Welcome to the family, man. Welcome to the family. We are getting more and more family members. You are deeply appreciated for joining. Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate you. Lotta Marrow. What also bothered me, that other journalists didn't interfere and demand that Blinken, what are you doing? Sam had credentials to be there and ask questions and not to be removed. Quote unquote, democracy on display. Yeah, the CNN reporter called a reporter getting like literally manhandled out by goons out of the press room for asking questions. And he said, this is the epitome of democracy. This is what democracy is. Having a journalist manhandled and dragged out. And they try to act like he was some kind of foreign agent, despite the fact that the man is American, every bit as much so as the journalists criticizing him for being ripped out of that room. Yeah, it is bothersome that media wouldn't necessarily stand up for media when Acosta was, gently pushed by Trump in a rhetorical sense. Oh, everybody flipped out. Oh my God, I can't believe Trump is attacking media like this. He gets dragged out and nobody says anything. And not just not says anything. He pointed out that nobody contacted him after the fact. And then you get CNN trashing him afterwards. So yeah, Lotta Monroe, agreed. Janice Anderson. It is Walter Cronkite era. We have our journalism like you, Gray Zone, RBN, Blackout Network. That's what Nick Cruz. Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the R. Heartlands Media, Electronic Intifada, etc. All of whom speak to anybody, respect. Yeah, man. I mean, look, social media can get it wrong, but oftentimes they are reaching for something and often leading in a way that other media organizations eventually latch on to. They're hitting at something, and the reason that they exist is because mainstream media has effectively lost credibility with the American public. So yeah, agreed. Garland Nixon, the man himself. Luckily, no one watches CNN anyway. That is also true. Have you seen the ratings on CNN? Those things are abominable. Concerned Citizen, Russia and India just signed a 20-year deal. Yes, we were talking about that before. Concerned Citizen and Jabari, VOC Media. Jamal, I got to actually do interviews. We'd love for you to be on my show. Hit me up on email and we will see what happens. Look, I'm going to end this because I have to be on somebody else's show. But I want to thank all of you. All of you help makes the show what it is. Like the content, share it, subscribe to the channel. You guys have a fantastic weekend. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 79. Signing off.